Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the.
One moment, they are
Okay.
not coming in. We have to wait that they were in the front door, shall I say, and they have to come in.
Okay.
Slowly, but they are coming in.
Yeah, we have already some of them here.
Maria João, I've just given co-host status to both Larissa and to Jonas. Hello, Jonas and Larissa. You're having co-host rights. You can connect your cameras, if you will.
Antonio, you have to make them co-host. You made them panelists.
Okay.
And perhaps,
Yes.
Ines is here. Okay. And Larissa too.
Both of them are already co-hosts, yes.
Okay. And Dora, if she's there. Okay. And I'm going to see everyone has mic. Okay. So I think perhaps you can start, yes? Suero.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to session 3 of the poster series. The title is BRIPA ceremony. I was curious about what it meant, BRIPA, but then I read it, and it's Best Research in Progress Award. It's a new award aiming at recognizing quality of research in progress. And it's called poster, but in reality, it means paper representing research in progress. And you can download the papers. I've read some of them, and it's worth reading. You have also the presentations in PowerPoint or in video, and I suggest that you take a look. And if you haven't done that during the 2 other sessions, there were about 16, I guess it's the number that I have in my head, but the president of the jury for this award may correct what I'm saying. In fact, this is an interesting award because it tries to recognize high quality research and that is being done by the authors. And this is an award, like I said, it's new, it's fresh from this year, and it has been supported by READ. In Portuguese, it means, in English, the Journal of Distance Education and E-Learning from Universidade Aberta, and this journal and the editor-in-chief, which is the president of the jury, my colleague and friend Aldo Pereira, with whom we have several work together and debates. It's been a long time that we have worked together from Universidade Aberta and from the laboratory lead from the same university. And this process of selecting the winner of this award as two phases. The first one was to pre-select 3 final candidates, and this jury that made this selection is chaired by, like I said already, by Professor Aldepreda, and the other members are Antonella Poce from the University degli Studi di Roma 3 di Italy. She has been the ex-coordinator of the NAP steering committee, and Vlad Mihaescu, I hope I pronounce it correctly, from the Polytechnic University of Timișoara in Romania. He's currently the coordinator of the NAP steering committee. And another member is Antonio Quintas Medas, professor at the University Aberta in Portugal, and from the same laboratory lead, and Professor Isolino Oliveira, also from the same university and from the same laboratory. So after this introduction, I, of course, would like to know the winner. I don't know the winner. I know who I voted for, but I don't know the winner. So I think that it's time to hear the president of the jury and editor-in-chief of the Read magazine from the Universidade Aberta, my colleague Alda Prater. So she's online, and the floor is yours, Alda. So you can proceed.
Thank you, Alfred. Good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure to be here in honor, to honor the authors of the posters voted by participants. This jury had to select 3 posters, which should be analyzed and voted on by the conference's participants. 16 posters were analyzed, hugely different, some of them with great quality. The task was not easy, since the choice should be made considering work in progress. Several interesting works were eliminated because they did not fit the criteria. On the other hand, it was necessary to specify what could be research in progress. Therefore, it was adopted as criteria to consider only research that had already started, even a short time ago. This criteria in turn led to the elimination of 2 high-quality works that reported investigations already carried out, and another which was a research project. Then a new analysis was made on 9 proposals remaining, which led to some discussion among the members of the jury. The analysis of the consistency between the question under investigation and the chosen methodological approach, including the analysis of partial and preliminary results, was therefore other criteria considered. Lastly, the analysis of innovative aspects related with the main idea or with methodological approach all allowed to the selection of 3 works to be submitted to the voting on the participants. Now, I'm going to say some words about the posters. The author of the paper, Integrated Learning by Design Pedagogy in Teacher Training, Jonas, shows us an ongoing research aiming to use educational data mining to empower students to improve learning. It's a promising work in progress and could contribution on how the technology can support an innovative approach to assessment for learning. For now, the investigation is still beginning, but we hope it will bring important and new results. The poster, Teacher Training through Argumentation to Promote Autonomous Learning in Educational Environment Mediated by Technology, the Larissa, introduces an investigation focusing on an especially important problem in distance education, student autonomy. Bearing in mind that we'll see since now a rising interest on models of hybrid learning, the issue of autonomy will be on the agenda. The reported approach presupposes the need to train teachers to be aware of the need to foster autonomy in students and brings to light an innovation way of doing it through argumentation in teaching training. While the results are still partial, the approach is interesting, and we hope that the research will raise good recommendations. Distance learning versus emergency remote learning Portuguese schools in a turning point for digital transformation. This is a beginning work on a very important issue raised by the current pandemic situation. The results will be crucial for all teachers and schools, bearing in mind the implementation of sustainable hybrid education ecology. The methodological approach selected is very promising. It's all for the moment, Alfred.
Thank you. It's been an interesting presentation and complete about who were the finalists and their authors and the topics. So now I would like to show you the certificates that are going to be awarded. I mean, the candidates are probably nervous, but you have to wait a little bit. And so the secretariat can show this. Okay, there you go. So you have the honorary mention certificate to Jonas Becklin and his paper. Can we see the next one, please? And this is the second one, that second, but not in order of merit. So it's the second in terms of the list. Was granted to Larissa Enriquez and Mirna Hernandez from UNAM. And the next one, please. And you have here the winner of the award to Ana Paula Afonso, Antonieta Rocha, Maria João Spilker, and Lina Morgado. I would like Aldo Pereira to say a few words right now if it thinks that it's wise. Otherwise, I will ask the winners to say some words, or somebody from the authors. So Aldo, do you want to say something now, or?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Alfred. I would invite all the authors of the three posters to submit them to the Journal of Distance Education and E-Learning to be published in a next edition, please. Thank you, Alfred.
Thank you. Now I repeat my invitation to the authors or a representative of the authors that have won the award to say some words.
I think Jonas was here. Perhaps you can say
Yes.
something.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
quite well.
So first of all, thank you for the whole conference. I've been so inspired because in my research within my master's thesis, I'm struggling with the methodology. And by having all these work in progress and seeing how researchers have used the data to actually prove the outcome has been so valuable to me. And the poster itself, as the motivation was, I agree 100% myself, because when I seen the Common Ground Scholar, CG Scholar platform, we basically are mimicking the project they've been started already. And when I saw that it actually is possible with educational data mining to start giving the students feedback on their work before it's handed in to evaluation, that is something that I think is so important. And I look forward to putting this into a more format for the correct publication. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonas. Larissa, do you want to say something? Please do.
Yes, thank you. Well, I also want to thank the committee and Eden for doing this workshop, this research workshop, and also for the acknowledge that they gave us. It's a challenge, and it helped us to keep on moving. We have been, Mirna and I, very interested in working with teachers and students as well and autonomous learning. But we believe that teachers are fundamental in enhancing autonomous learning with students. So all the questions, all the comments that we received, and this event is very challenging to continue with our work. So I just want to thank you all for it and congratulate everyone.
Good. Thank you. So
Thank
we
you,
have the
Larissa.
winner.
Yeah, I want to say it. Thank you.
May I?
Yeah.
Hello all. First of all, I would like to congratulate Larissa and Jonas and all the other participants. Being a researcher is not an easy task, and so just for that we are all congratulated. Second, I would like to in my name and on behalf of my fellow co-authors, I would like to thank Eden and the members of the jury for this recognition of our work. It is a great honor to receive this award, which we accept as a motivation for further work, but above all, as a great responsibility that our peers have placed upon us as a research team. So thank you very much for this award.
Thank you. Thank you and congratulations to all participants, authors, especially for the finalists and the winner. I think that Eden has that capacity to enable sharing research. And some of you have heard it before, but I think personally, I think there's not enough research on what we are doing here in Eden. So any research is welcome, especially if it can be shared with the others. So thank you to all that have presented the papers. I would like to thank the magazine from the University of Alberta, the journal, and for this award. I think it's an incentive to everyone to publish and to next year to apply for the award. And I wish all a good rest of the conference. Thank you very much for being here. And let's go for the last session in some time and enjoy the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you at all.
Thank you, Alfredo, and congratulations to all the winners and the finalists. I see here Larissa, Jonas, Anna, Maria, João, and all the others. Tim is already here. Tim will be leading. Actually, he's the chair of the closing keynote session. So thank you very much, Alfredo and Alda. And I will now give the floor to Tim. Tim, are you there?
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, I am, Antonio. Thank you. For some reason, the video camera won't start, but that doesn't really matter. You all know what I look like.
Terry is here. Martin as well. As you know, Maha will be joining us a little bit later. You have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Antonio.
Okay, Shadow, please, it's sorry to interrupt you. Please give Timothy a co-host status so that he can.
Done.
Okay, so Timothy, I think that you can now share
Yes,
your
I
screen.
can.
Okay,
Much better.
great.
Thank you very much, Maria. Okay, so welcome to this final closing plenary session. We have 3 speakers this afternoon who I am very honored to present here. We're going to start with Terry Anderson, who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Terry is the Professor Emeritus of Distance Education at Athabasca University in Canada. He's an educational researcher and teacher focusing on ICT tools in teaching and learning. He teaches in master's and doctoral education programs in distance education at that university. Terry is the editor emeritus of the Open Access Journal, the International Review of Research on Open and Distance Education, or RODL, and a member of TECRI, Technology Enhanced Knowledge Research Institute at Athabasca University. He's a regular keynote speaker at education and training conferences, both online and face-to-face, and his specialities include research, teaching, and social networking. He also serves on advisory committees with the Alberta and the Canadian governments and serves on several editorial boards. And he's going to talk to us today about quality through 3 generations and aggregations of online learning. Thank you, Terry.
Great. My video isn't allowed. I can't seem to start my video. Oh, there it is. So good. Well, thank you, Timothy, for that rather long introduction. And what I would like to do now is to get my slide share, my slides going, and here we are. Thank you. I assume that you can see that, Timothy? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, I can. It's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, it is a real pleasure to be asked again to address an Eden Research workshop. I have very fond memories of Eden Research network conferences. I mentioned in a little teaser that that was my very first international keynote was at Eden in Oldenburg in 2004. And I told a joke about why distance education was better than sex. And I won't repeat that joke, but you can search it on Google. And I guess from that experience, I don't know, I think the jokes have ended up, so I've been invited back, and here I am today too. So thank you very much, Eden, and everyone who's been organizing this conference. Okay, now why am I not going forward here? Okay, oh dear. I always start keynote presentations by talking about the values that inspire me, and I assume that this inspire a lot of you, a lot of distance educators, online teachers in general. But I really think we can and we must improve the quality, the effectiveness, the cost, the access, all of those social justice issues that have driven us from the first distance education models up to where we are today. And secondly, I think we really need to get into lifelong education and decide that whatever they do in a formal education should be a stepping stone for student empowerment and freedom so that they can go on learning throughout their whole lives. And finally, the cost of education, I think it's a human right. And I think we have to do more to providing access when we can, or as we must. Just to show a little joke here of this is what people have in their profile picture versus how they actually look in a Zoom meeting like we're doing right now. And to give you an illustration, that's the picture that was on the keynote. And you can see I'm a little bit older, a little hairier than that. And you know, that's one of the advantages of online learning or on virtual conferences, and ways that our identity is mixed with the technology that we use. And one thing Antonio said on the opening session of this conference, he said that he just reflected that it was his first virtual conference. And I guess that struck me as strange. Well, you know, I guess it gives us, you know, we talked about many sessions, Tony Bates and others talked about the COVID-19 impact on teaching and learning. And it gives us, the epidemic gives us a time to reflect as professionals, as change agents. But what is it for you personally? You know, how has this conference been better, been worse, been the same, more accessible, less accessible, cheaper, all those sorts of things? And what is the most significant personal learning that you've had from this conference, professional learning? And what do you think is going to change at your institution as a result of this conference? And or are you feeling like this tweet from Amy Morgan yesterday? She said, I want to go to a real conference with bad coffee and pastries and get some pens and a tote bag instead of logging into another webinar. Well, I think that for those of us who have attended some of the sessions, that this hasn't just been another webinar. We've had some very interesting talk. But I like the debate very much, the Oxford debate that Alan Tate facilitated. And the question, let me just paraphrase the question: the COVID-19 pandemic will have no lasting impact on Eden's and my own professional development. And I think that's something we can think about as we go about our own professional learning and reflect on how this has been for each of us. And let me do a little brag sheet. This is my one and my only claim to internet fame, is that I organized the very first online conference ever held online. And that was in 1992 for ICDE. And it was before the internet, so we used BitNet and NetNorth and FidoNet and all sorts of other ways that we hacked together electronic communications asynchronously through email. But since then, Lynn Anderson and I wrote a book about online conferences, and that's a little dated too, 1990. I think this book was 2002 or something like that. But anyways, they've been a long time, and it's interesting that us as the professionals, leaders in the distance ed field, how we're not that experienced in online conferences yet. So one of the things that I've gotten by, I tend to ask all the students that I come across, post-secondary and secondary, to tell me what it's like to learn online, as they've all been thrown into it in Canada, as in most of the world. And you get, what surprises me is how different the reactions is. You know, some people, you know, it sucks. Other people say it used to be way better. Other people says, I love it. I can stay home. I can do this. I can turn off. I can repeat, you know, all those sorts of things. But it strikes me that there's a huge variation on what technology are they using. What time is it? Asynchronous, synchronous, unpaced, paced? What quality goes into the professional development and the instructional design and the teacher skill? What net literacy do the students have? What age are they? Because I think it varies over age. But maybe most important, and what I'm going to talk about today, is that there's at least three different pedagogies that are used in online learning. And they have different outcomes, different intents, and they go in different directions. And so when we talk about what's quality in distance ed or online ed, I think we really have to be clear about what are the criteria? What's the pedagogy that we're using? And I know that educators love to say, it isn't the technology, it's the pedagogy. Well, that is true, but they do have a dance together, and the one does influence the other. Okay, this is a quote from a teacher in Australia, and notice that she says, what pedagogical principles drive what I normally do? In other words, what do I do in the classroom, and how can I use these technologies to transform them? I think that's the common, I heard that from Tony Bates' talk, and from the debate, that, you know, people tend to teach the way they were taught, and what they're striving to do is to take that online or that classroom experience and put it out online. And if that's your criteria for what's a high quality course, then it'll be quite a bit different than if you're having a self-paced learning, or as you'll see, the three generations, the way I've sliced it. But it's about interaction, empowerment, and engagement, and learning is experience, everything else just information. And we see information glut, but we don't see learning, growing anywhere near as fast as the content. So how do we put those two together is what I'll be talking about. And again, I think showing my age here, 2011, John Rahn wrote this article, 3 Generations of Distance Education Pedagogy. And I wanted to revisit those three with a kind of an update in both the technology and the way we think about teaching and learning in the last 9 years. So the first generation, basically cognitive behaviorism. It's instructional design. If you were trained as an instructional system designer, especially in North America, you would have learned about Gagné and how learning works. You gain their attention, you tell them what's going to be taught, you stimulate recall. It's very structured. There's clear ways that teaching and learning should happen, and then you assess performance and you enhance transfer opportunities. So structured, a way forward that we followed for many years, especially in the early days of distance education. But again, the cognitive revolution came along, and we started learning about chunking and cognitive load and working memory and split attention, all these other things, or variables that interact in the teaching and learning context. But one of the things that it celebrated was the capacity to learn alone. And I think that's, especially when we talk about the challenges teachers have going from the classroom to an online environment, there's this idea, and students have it as well, that I really need somebody to hold my hand, to tell me what to do, to work in a group and learning alone. But this first generation doesn't necessarily, in fact, it almost celebrates the idea of freedom of space and time and pace. And that's why at Athabasca, in our undergraduate program, it continues to this day. There's no paced instruction. It's all, you pace yourself. You start when you want, you finish when you want. It allows individualization, freedom from groupthink, and the power of learning to learn. And again, people talk about the value of working in groups, but it also gives you the freedom from groups. And I think that's an important part of lots of different ways that we learn things. So what is the nature of knowledge? It's coherent, existing, almost independent of perspective, context-free, and it can be transmitted. You can take knowledge and I can transmit it to other people. And it assumes a closed system with discoverable relationships between what goes in, what comes out. And that's why, from a research perspective, it's very powerful and sometimes very easy to measure the inputs that you have and measure the output on final high stakes exam or something like that. The technologies, again, Martin's going to, I assume, talk about OERs, simulations, textbooks, one-way lectures, but there have been some very significant advances with the technologies for the first generation. And up on the left, you see just a straight MOOC, a video lesson MOOC. I'm sure you've all seen them. Most of you probably participated in one. But what's the difference is on the right, students are typing in comments or questions, and they're not doing it in real time. because the MOOC is self-paced, and they're able to just type it in. And so you can see somebody's comment, even though that comment was by that person studying alone, 2 weeks, 2 years ago. It's kind of, it provides an economy and a scalability that we don't see in the other generations. And down at the bottom here, you see one of my classes of VoiceThread interaction, where people are not only adding their text comments asynchronously, but they're adding video and audio as well. I think there's a number of tools that are available to do just this. We're also seeing that there's been a big push on chatbots for customer interaction. And some of them can be very useful, as probably many of you have interacted with a chat box, but we're just starting to see them used now in education for any number of, if you think of how many questions a teacher gets that are not about the subject matter, but what day is the exam due, or I'm going to be late, all the sort of the logistical kind of stuff that isn't really relying on the teacher's her subject matter nor her magnetic personality. They just want information, and machines are great at that. And then this is from the States. One of the registrars says there's a humanistic connection to a chatbot that would never have expected. Students are also almost more comfortable sharing those fears with the chatbot. So there's you get into the fact that the interaction in the first generation is with content, and that the tools of the content are changing very rapidly. And of course, MOOCs, it's easy to say, oh, MOOCs are so, 2012 or whatever, that they're not making any money, or they're going away or whatever. But as you can see, the number continues to grow, and the number of people engaged in them. OERs, and as we've heard many of people recently, it's not the educational, it's not the open educational object, it's the open educational practices that we really need to work on now. And mostly I'm a huge fan of OERs because they save time. There's so many educational interventions that just take up teachers' time, and I think OERs have a good potential to reduce that time. We're starting to see very powerful tools, scary as well. This one's, I don't know a lot about, but LightSail, it's for K-12 learners. But, the loneliness of the distance education teacher is that the teacher, especially in this first generation, hardly, in the past anyways, in correspondence days, wasn't really in touch with the student. They couldn't really know what's happening with these students. And now we have these tools where the machine is reading out things and listening to students. It's saying what pieces, what speeds they're reading at all the time. Just a whole bunch of data that can be had. Again, this is a commercial company, and it was rated by this Common Sense Selection as having a huge high learning rating and a pedagogy rating. And I just underline the point that it depends what kind of pedagogy we're talking about. Is this a good tool or is it a bad tool? And then, of course, learning analytics. I know the Solar Group is on to their 8th or 9th annual conference in their journal, and there's learning analytics is huge, and it especially works with this first generation. But colleagues, are these dashboards really doing the job, or do they just present what's easily measured? And Matcha, Gasovic, and Pardo wrote just a few months ago that, or found by analyzing these dashboards, that they're rarely grounded in learning theory. They cannot be suggested to support metacognition, and they do not for any information about effective learning tactics and strategies, and have significant limitations in how their evaluation is conducted. As researchers, we tend to love graphs and pictures that show the truth, but it's let's remember that learning happens inside people's heads, and it's not easily measured nor displayed through learning analytics or any other way. And finally, the big challenge with this first generation, especially, and maybe all the generations, is this idea that data is going out there, it's being used, and especially if you start using social media, commercial social media. And I hope that most of you have seen Zuboff's book on surveillance capitalism. It was a real eye-opener for me. But there is a real danger of cloud computing owning and selling our data. And I congratulate the EU for doing a lot more work on, trying to get a handle on what Google and Amazon and Facebook are up to in terms of controlling public discourse. So there's huge privacy issues. And my own solution that I struggled with at Athabasca and was not that successful, but John Drawn and I built a social media, our own kind of semi-private Facebook, if you like. And I think that's part of the solution. I think students are going to, and teachers are going to demand that our institutions are not having our information sold to the highest bidder and used for whatever kind of purposes. But the real power of this first generation is it maximizes delegation. The student and I don't have to be responsible for deciding the curriculum, seeing if I know it, measuring my progress. I can delegate that all to the institution or to the teacher. And freeing students from that delegation is just one of the freedoms, and I'll get to them a little bit later, but it is an important one for this generation. So how do we research it? Usually first generation focuses on empirical stuff. And we ask the questions, when you add these new technologies, does it really add value? And we have to remember to subtract the known and the unknown side effects. If you can subtract something that is unknown. And then asking the question, how does enhanced use of technology affect those with less technological and economic flexibility? And we saw that in one of the other keynotes talking about the difference in literacy levels amongst students based on gender and socioeconomic background. And then this first generation has a real problem with high stakes testing and figuring out how we should make sure that assessment is really assessing learning in a way that's both efficient and effective, or most importantly, that it's effective. It really does help students and not just prevent stress or give them stress and barriers. So first generation conclusion, interaction is mostly one-to-one. It's an important role of student content interaction rather than student-teacher or student-student. We're talking about student content interaction. It has assessment and privacy issues, but it's scalable. And remember I talked about the right to basic education is one of the values that drives me, and reducing costs. And the first generation, why we invented it in the first place for correspondence, was it is scalable. And when you talk to developing countries, I was at UNISA a few months ago, and where they have hundreds of thousands of students, you're not going to scale up the second generation as we'll see in a second. And OERs, MOOCs, analytics, they promise to reduce cost and increase efficiency of these interactions. Again, they present challenge, but they present promise too. Okay, moving to the second. I hope I'm not taking too much time here. It's group orientated, and rather than the focus on the individual, we start to focus on the group or the team or the class or whatever. So it's exclusive in that you're either in the course or you're out of the course, and it's usually closed group instruction on an LMS or some other way. Oftentimes it's a very teacher dominated kind of an environment. And, like down the bottom, the picture of Moodle, I remember the people who invented Moodle always bragging that it was a constructivist-based tool. Well, I think we've seen that it can be used for constructivist purposes, or it can be used for first generation or even connectivist ways of learning as well. So I don't think they're inherently one or the other. But there is a focus on collaboration and shared purpose. And again, this quote down at the bottom, creating a successful online community is dependent on knowing what works in the face-to-face environment and implementing. Notice the transfer there. They're saying, you know, if I can get this right in a face-to-face like I've been doing all my career and for hundreds of years at our university, I can just move it into an online environment and it'll have a successful online community. And there's some truth to that. It is a very nice transition from face-to-face learning to follow this pedagogy. It's socially constructed, arrived at through dialogical encounters with other people. And so it really focuses on learning together, sharing, defending your views, all the stuff that I'm sure many of you have taken courses or been taught to teach in a constructivist manner. Again, synchronous really made a big difference to this second generation. I remember my PhD supervisor, Randy Garrison, some of you may remember him, but he in fact, he was on one of the panels in this session. But he made his career in a way by arguing that we had to get away from this industrial model of Otto Peters, and we had to really talk about real interaction. And what he meant by that, it was synchronous interaction. And it was always by audio conference in those early days, but now, of course, as we're doing right now. It gives you immediacy, it gives you pacing. So every Tuesday night, I know I have to do this or do that. And I think that can be very valuable for people. Social modeling, we can see how others answer, we can see how the teacher operates. And that's been an important part of teaching and learning for a long time. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a comfortable media for students and teachers. And you think, well, if video conferencing is good, then immersion must be better. And you've seen Second Life come and go, mostly go, but it still is kind of a fringe technology out there for teaching and learning. It's interesting to just speculate why, if a little bit of visual and is good, why isn't more than just a talking head? Why don't we have places in our learning? And I don't know what your own experiences are. I've always, when I used to take classes in there, I'd lose half of them, and it was just a little too disconcerting for an old guy like me. Who knows? Okay, just an example of the kind of availability of an OER here. Just I wanted to give a talk out to this open access book on collaborative learning, lots of activities, lots of projects, lots of ways that, you know, if teachers who are being forced by COVID into an online environment, they often don't know how to conduct collaborative kind of learning. So what do they know how to learn? They know how to lecture, so they lecture. And but I think there are resources, and I think as change agents, it's useful for us to promote them. The social forum is group based, as I said. It's limited in size. I have seen courses going up to 50 students per teacher, if you like, in a real-time session. I don't think you can go too much higher. Dunbar's maximum number, you know, 150 people who you can get to know. Anyways, there's one of the things that John and I have always thought is that what defines a group is that you have mutual awareness, or at least the capacity to become mutually aware of of everyone else who's in the group. Is there too much teacher domination and dependency? I guess we'll leave that to you, but it isn't scalable, at least not like the first generation was. Some great new tools. I was particularly like this by Diana Laureland and her team in London, is that it breaks down this constructivism into actually what the teachers do. And if you look at your proposed course, and as you're planning it, or your anticipation of it, how much is content interaction? How much collaboration? How much discussion? How much investigation? How much practice? How much production? And then this, you goes directly working in a spreadsheet, and it draws some nice little spider graphs there for you to see that really, this is what my course from a constructivist perspective should look like. It should have major components of all of these. and really, what does my course have? And I think is a really useful tool. Group management enhancements, the Google Docs, the Slack systems, all of these things I think are great for groups. One of the problems that I always felt with groups is you can do almost anything at a distance in a synchronous group or even asynchronously, but it's going to take twice as long, or it takes a lot longer. Just getting people coordinated and on at first base at the same time, all that sort of thing. But the tools really help along those lines. So how do we research it? I think we focus on the lived experience of participants. At least it's the normal way it does. That term lived experience always gets me, because what other kind of experience is there but lived experience? But anyways, the researcher often asks why or how, not just counting and how much. It's often used interviews and focus groups. I love the tools now that you can use that will do voice transcription and qualitative analysis that we never had before. But it does raise the question, it's a focus on interaction, and how much interaction is enough, how much is too much? And what inhibits or supports this critical group collaboration in the second generation? So you can see that if your idea of what you're trying to do in your online learning has a constructivist focus, it will have a lot of different outputs in terms of quality. It'll look different than the one on the first generation. So a summary, not scalable, it can be expensive. There are many new tools coming out to enhance the efficiency. It focuses on the human skills, student to student and student teacher. And as I said, it's the easiest pedagogy for teachers and learners transitioning to online. So the third and final, and I know there are many ways that one can cut out educational tech or educational psychology or pedagogies. And John and I have picked these three, but there are other alternatives as well. And so we called it connective pedagogies as opposed to just connectivism, as George Siemens and Stephen Downes would say. But it also has lots of pedagogical basis. It looks at chaos theory and emergence, and Dave Cormier's rhizomatric learning and communities of practice. And often what I've noticed about researchers in Europe is they're a lot more interested and knowledgeable about actor network theory than we are here in North America. And so I think that is a strength that can be applied to this third generation. So from George Siemens, his big 8 that he published, I think it was 2004. What is connectivism? It's created by linking to appropriate people and to objects. And maybe, I think he even says it's that wisdom can be created and stored in non-human devices. And so whether that's exactly true or not, I don't even know if George would argue these days, but it's certainly true that we can offload to machines in ways that we had never dreamed about before, our cognitive processes. And we have the opportunity to exploit those. It's about capacity to learn rather than what I actually learn or what I can answer on a test. It's showing my capacity to learn with and from machines, other people, remote resources. But it does assume the ubiquitous internet, and we all know that there are I wouldn't say many, there are lots of people on this planet who do not have access to ubiquitous internet at an affordable price. And the other fact is that it's emergent. One never knows exactly what's going to happen to when you do a connectivist-based course. How many people are going to enroll? How many people are going to last? Is it going to be just a few? And you have to wait and let the kind of the magic of human and networking emerge, and that's challenging. I wrote a blog a long time ago just talking about the 3 ways that you can connectify your course. And networks effects is probably the biggest one, that things can get amplified. You can find things through accessibility, through the search engines. And persistence is that the learning that happens this year You don't start over next September doing the same old courses that you taught last year, because you've learned some things since last year. And so if your students learn some things. And so by building on the artifacts that those students create in the past, we help them to create content in a connectivist model. Not learning in a bubble. That was one of the things we tried to do with our homegrown Facebook at Athabasca, was to say, sometimes I want everyone in the world, including my grandmother, to be able to read what a wonderful thing I've just done, or picture, or something like that. But other times I want it closed. I want to just have my teacher know. I just want to have my friends know, my class know. And so having that control over it, it's not in a bubble, but that bubble can expand to the whole world. But it's very disruptive, high levels of net literacy and presence. It's scary for a lot of people, teachers and students. Requires new roles for teachers and students. And there are big issues about artifact ownership, persistence, privacy. For many years in my grad courses, I would post what students had written, or research assignments or whatever from past years with their permission. And it was very interesting. Some people thought, oh man, I would never read that, I'd be cheating. And other people said, oh, thank God I could read that, because I can now understand what I'm supposed to do. So there's this legacy that can live on and is celebrated in a connectivist environment, but it can be a bit too manic for some. This is from John drawn in my book, Teaching Crowds, where we did these kind of spider graphs where we talked about all the kind of freedom that students have, or could have, or should have, and teachers as well. And then for each of these aggregations or pedagogies, we drew these kind of maps. And this is just the connectivist one. And if it goes out to the edge, then it's maximizing the freedom. So you can see the location, you can study where you want, what time you want. Pacing is often set by the individual students. You can socialize with whom you want, or network with whom you want. The approach in the pedagogy, a little less safe, but it's still pretty flexible. But where it really fails is, notice this one, we had to invent the word delegatability, couldn't think of anything better. But sometimes I want to choose to let a teacher teach me this. It'll be a lot better for me and faster. And connectivism doesn't really lend itself to that. You know, it's kind of, the burden is on the learner to go out and to help to create the network, create the linkages and the connections, and teach themselves a little bit more in this model. So how do we research this? This is a research seminar. There's ideas of checking or measuring innovation, wayfinding. How do they make sense of the net? How do they operate? What kind of skills do they have in terms of creation of content? All those sorts of things. Again, examining and archiving of the learning artifacts is very important to kind of measure the types and the diversity of students' net presence. And as for all of these things, I'm a huge fan of design-based studies, because I think rather than just running around measuring things, we have to do interventions. We have to add a new tool to the game, or sort of try something, measure it. Don't get hung up on it being qualitative or quantitative. Just be pragmatic and figure out what can help my students and my teaching. So just to summarize, connectivism born on the net, the locus of control shifts to students more so. It's emergent and disruptive, and does raise the question, do you have to already be fairly advanced learner in order to maximize learning using this pedagogy? So John and I did some other work just talking about the aggregations of these. Again, repeating the individual is the focus, and the first generation, groups in the second, and networks and sets. And you might not be familiar with the idea of a set, but basically it's all the people who are interested in subject X or who've enrolled in this MOOC or something like that? And how do we make connections and allow them to help each other learn within the set, even though you'll never know their names or, you know, they go beyond the personal identity. And I think my time is ending, so this is my concluding slide, is that students really, and teachers, deserve the experience of trying out all three of these generations. Learning structured content by oneself, in groups, and in networks. And there is no one pedagogical model, context, depth, intensity, or aggregation that supports learning for everyone. But I think we need multiple types of, or multiple kinds of pedagogy driving forward, but we also need multiple types of research. And I hope that this little talk has inspired you in your own research within your institution and as an individual. So I did upload the slides. If you just do a search for Terry A on SlideShare, you can see it there. And I look forward to any comments.
Thank you very much, Terry. That was a very interesting and entertaining presentation. We've got time for a couple of questions. There's one from Maria in the chat. You talk in the second edition of your book, Online Conferences. What would you like to change or add?
Well, that's good. Well, I guess if you look at the sophistication of the tool, the platform that we're using for this Eden conference, it's way above in terms of both handling the logistics of registration, in terms of the profile pictures, in terms of, you know, switching between synchronous and asynchronous, integrating various technologies. So there is a big technological push. The second thing I would talk more about is just that we had this idea, you know, that you have to jump on an airplane and go a long ways away in order to get away from the real world and you know, immerse yourself in the conference. And we weren't very good at multitasking. Whereas now, when you go to the conference face to face, half the people are sitting with their laptops open back home, you know. So there's a big convergence in face to face and other conferences. And third, we did emphasize it a bit and did a bit of a study on the impact on carbon emissions of virtual conferences and air travel, you know, especially for me in North America to come to Portugal, despite the quality of the wine, it would, you know, it's starting to be a more important thing weighing on my head is just, you know, what is the cost of all, in terms of not only money, but in terms of the environment. And I think that's a lot bigger now than it was in 2004. But I hope it's surprisingly how few books there are on virtual conferences. There's sites now, commercial sites, but I think there's lots of research that could and should be done by some young people.
Yeah, I quite agree. Thank you very much, Lars. That was a great answer. Final question then from my colleague, Alfredo Suera. How do you suggest that we should focus on the assessment of student learning?
The assessment of student learning. Yeah, well, I think that there's growing evidence that our reliance on the high stakes testing, it's pedagogically not very sound. We know that people get themselves under huge amounts of stress, whether it's sitting in their home being watched by a machine or a human, or whether it's I think we need authentic assessment, ways in which we more directly tie what the students do to what's being assessed, rather than just sitting them in a room and having them write an exam. And we have a big legacy within the distance education world anyways, and the open universities about you know, celebrating and really thinking that final exam is a very critical importance. And I know it's going to be hard for us to give that up, but there isn't much pedagogical grounds for it. And there's certainly some logistic problems that COVID is bringing up. And of course, we've trained students to be cheaters in many ways, because it is such a high stakes that they have very little choice in. And they react as you might expect. I wish I had the answer to that one.
I think you've given us some good insights. So thank you very much again, Terry. I'm going to pass over to my second presenter here, Martin Weller, who's the director of the OER Hub at the Open University in the UK. He's a professor of educational technology, and his interest has always been in the application of new technology to academic practice. He leads the Open University OER Hub research team, running a portfolio of projects examining the impact of open educational practices. Martin joined the OU back in 1995 as a lecturer in AI, and he chaired the OU's first major e-learning conference, T171, inspiring name, back in 1999, with nearly 15,000 students. This involved a number of strategic shifts in the OU to make it an online provider. He was the first director of the VLE, recommending the adoption of Moodle, and is currently the academic director for the Learning Design Project and also director of the OER Hub. His research area is in open education and digital scholarship. He runs a blog about this and has authored 2 books, The Digital Scholar and The Battle for Open, both of which are available under open licenses. He practices what he preaches. He's a regular and reasonably well-known blogger at edtechie.net, and today his title is 25 Years of EdTech, Why an Understanding of the History of Educational Technology is Important in the Pandemic. Thank you, Martin.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Cool. So I'll try sharing my screen. 5 books, if you don't mind. Tim.
Well, you go. I didn't invent it.
Let's get it right while we're here. Cool. Is that good for you? You can all
That's
see that?
fine. Thank you very much.
Cool. Yes, okay, cool. So what I'm going to talk about is my 5th book. So actually, 25 Years of EdTech. So this has quite a lot of resonance with what Terry was just saying, actually. I probably should have gone before Terry, I think, because then he could have done the deep dive into some of the things that I'm only touching upon lightly. But, so an alternative title for this would be, I remember when this was all paper, because really 25 years is quite a nice time to look back over EdTech and think about, because it takes, well, it depends when you start it from, but if you go back to sort of like the mid-90s, that's really when the internet started to become pervasive. And I work in the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University, which was founded in 1970. So obviously we did lots of things we would call EdTech before the internet came along. But I think really in the mid-90s is when it started to become synonymous with digital technologies and the internet. So that's the sort of era that I'm looking at. And another alternative title is Why Knowing Some History of EdTech is a Good Idea in the Pandemic. And hopefully I'll have time to come to that at the end. Now you'll notice there's a slightly different version of each of these graphics on each slide, and you can remix your own. I'll give you a link to remix the cover of the book later, which is done by my friend Brian Mathers. So just about the book, it's Creative Commons licensed, published by Athabasca University Press. Thanks, Terry, for helping set them up. So the digital version is freely available, and the visuals have been done by Brian Mathers, and they're also freely available. You can download those. So I think we've covered all this from Tim. So I work at IET at the Open University. That's me on Twitter. That's my blog. So the 2 other books I've written that are open access are The Digital Scholar and Battle for Open. And I'm also the director of the Open program at the Open University, which is our interdisciplinary program where students can choose any module and combine them, which is becoming increasingly interesting, I think, in times of pandemic. Good. Okay, so an outline for the talk. I'm going to talk about the motivation for writing the book in the first place and the approach I took. As we're in a research seminar, you can really criticize my research methodology in writing this book. And I'm going to look at some of the technologies in the book and sort of split it up into 3 phases. I noticed that Terry had 3 generations. There must be something about us. Us old blokes, we like to split things up into 3 phases. Then I'll draw out some themes, I think, that come out of that analysis. And then hopefully we can think about what it means in times of the pandemic at the end. So the approach I took was in 2018, it was the Association for Learning Technology's 25th year, and I was the president of ALT at the time. And so I stupidly said in a conversation, why don't I write a blog post for each year for those 25 years? So I started doing that, and my approach was just to choose a technology from every year from 94, which is when we were looking at then, and just sort of use it to explore some of the issues that each of those technologies raised, how they were used, and what it meant for EdTech going forward. But it's really based on my experience. There was no kind of like, survey of what we should cover. And I slightly fudged it by saying, I'm going to choose when they become significant, in my view, not when they're invented and those kind of things. And of course, when they become significant is affected by my personal experience and my geographical locations. They may be more significant in other places at different times. But anyway, I wrote this blog series, which you can still see there. And at the end of it, it seemed to resonate with people, despite the fact that I felt I was running out of steam by about 2012, but I kept going. And so a lot of people said you should turn it into books. So that seemed like a good idea. I had the kind of basis there to start a book. But there are some. So I went away. I locked myself in a cottage in Cornwall in the middle of a big storm in the winter and wrote a book. And it was a good thing to do because it kind of gave me room to kind of explore some of those issues in more depth. But just before we go any further, there are some kind of limitations to that approach. So you're probably going to hate me at the end of this talk because I haven't mentioned your favorite technology. There are some glaring omissions. You'll say, what about mobile learning? What about game-based learning? And they should all be in there, I admit that. Or I have mentioned your favorite technology and you think I've misrepresented it. I put things in the wrong year. Sometimes several things were vying for the same year, so I had to kind of like shift some around, I think. So you might say this should have gone in this year, or this was when it was significant for me. Or I've missed something that's kind of not that you think is really significant. I also think this limitation of putting out a technology every year isn't that good for kind of perhaps longer, more abstract themes, things like accessibility or digital identity or academic labour. I think there's a flavour in all of those, across all of those technologies you might pull out, but it's probably not as good for kind of drawing them out over a longer time. They almost need 25 years of their own, I think, to kind of explore those. And it ends up being quite technology focused. Perhaps the technology is the kind of easier hook, I think, to kind of latch on to each year. As I mentioned, there were some glaring omissions, for which I just say sorry. But I think in the end, it's not just a nostalgia trip, and I'll come on to why. I mean, it is kind of quite fun to kind of look back and think, oh, do you remember bulletin board systems, whatever. But I think there's more to it than that. So I think the way to view it is like those 100 best film lists. There was much characterized by what's absent as what's in them. So it's more of a discussion starting point. Let's kind of put it that way. But I think what is more interesting is the motivations, I thought, for and there are a few. I think first of all, those of us who work in educational technology know that it's a field that people move into from other areas. It's not like, so the example I always give is if you went to a chemistry conference, I'm probably wildly stereotyping chemists here, but if you went to a chemistry conference and you sat down at lunch, probably everyone at that table would have a chemistry PhD. Because if you go to an ed tech conference, then people who sit down at lunch might have come from computer science, psychology, philosophy, art history. Is kind of a very rich mix. I think that's one of its strengths. What it means is we don't have a kind of shared understanding and common kind of knowledge base that arises from that kind of common canon of knowledge. So I want to try and provide one form of that, not the form. I'm not claiming that. I also wanted to push back against this kind of feeling we often see in the popular press, and particularly coming out from kind of Silicon Valley, this idea that higher education is too slow to do anything, to do any innovation, and it really needs people from outside to come along and save it, and it's never going to survive the digital world and those kind of things. So I wanted to demonstrate a kind of history of innovation that has taken place in higher education. And I think by having the book and looking back over 25 years, it allowed me to draw out some of these kind of longer themes and lessons that we'll come to, hopefully, if I stop waffling. I wanted to highlight the necessity of a critical approach, and I'll come on to that in the third of my phases. But I think mostly it was this desire to provide this kind of alternative historical narrative. One of the sort of concepts that often gets pushed in educational technology as a whole, is this idea of disruption. And the whole idea of disruption is that something's come along and sweeping away everything that's gone before. And it's a really bad theory just in general. It's particularly bad in education. We keep having this kind of year zero mentality, like, so people saying, oh, MOOCs are the first time we've done online learning. And as Tim said, many of us have been doing online learning at scale for some time before that. So it was quite a surprise to learn that it was invented in 2012. And you see that kind of repeatedly. So I wanted to kind of provide this narrative that refuted that approach. This cartoon from Brian, I think, sort of sums it up more easily than I just said. So historical amnesia, I think is kind of phrase. So we just like 94, hey, we've invented online learning. Then MOOCs 2012, we've just invented online learning. And then probably during the pandemic, now we've reinvented online learning. And it's just like each time it seems to be starting from scratch. And so these were the technologies I chose. So you can look out for your favorite ones there. But don't worry, I'm not going to have time to go through all 25 years now. We're not going to do this in real time 25 years later. But you can see the type of things that I've chosen there. So I think Terry mentioned open educational resources, MOOCs, VLEs, those kind of things. And I've kind of spread it up in the book. I don't do this, but I think since then I've started to think of it as three sort of phases really. It starts off optimistic, people going, wow, what can we do with this stuff? Then you get this kind of mainstreaming of e-learning. Then I think we move into a more kind of critical phase around a lot of the technology. So I think to start off with that that optimistic phase, to pick out just a few technologies. Okay, good. I think the one to kind of pick out the most is, surprise, surprise, the web really. So, and again, I'm not saying when it was invented, around sort of 95, I picked as the year when it was becoming mainstream and you could, people would know what you're talking about if you said a web browser and those kind of things. And the real potential for it for education became apparent. Although lots of people were still dismissive of it. And I think what the web really showed us is that it removed that barrier to publication. So anyone could publish anything. And at the time, that felt really liberating. Suddenly, you didn't have to do all this other stuff. And it meant conventional universities could do distance education, and we at the Open University distance education, we could do a lot more interactive stuff. And I think in many ways, we're still struggling with what the web gave us, that kind of freedom, because it seemed really great. Anyone could publish anything. But what that meant was anyone can publish anything. And that and that's become a real issue. It's like, as we see with the sort of far right and a lot of the kind of misinformation and disinformation we see online. And I think that so really, I think all of the things we're dealing with at the moment come from the fundamental liberty that the web kind of offered us. Constructivism, I don't know something on this now because Terry's covered it all, but around 97, so as Terry said, constructivism has long roots kind of in terms of concept and that, but around 1997, I thought it was really interesting. I would go to a lot of e-learning conferences and almost every paper started with, we took a constructivist approach to our learning. And sometimes I think that was an excuse for poor design. Basically, I haven't done anything, but hey, the students can construct their own knowledge, so therefore I'll just call it constructivist. But I think more interestingly, perhaps more fairly, I think what it really showed was academics really thinking about what the technology offered. And I think because it was new, people were thinking, what can we do now that we couldn't do before? And for instance, we were really excited about hypertext, that idea that you had non-linear text and people could go off and explore things and construct their own meaning from that. And there were lots of, talk about different pedagogies that we were sort of resurrecting that existed before, but applying in an online setting, problem-based learning, resource-based learning, all those things. And I think in many ways, we lost a lot of that excitement. So I'm the guy in Terry's cartoons going, online learning used to be better. So I think in some ways we lost some of that experimental approach. And it's interesting when you look at kind of very conventional MOOCs now, that they're not constructivist at all. They're very kind of straightforward, linear, watch this video, do this, then do this. So I think a lot of that kind of experimentation has been lost. And I think mainly that might be a result of the fact that because the internet and that is so pervasive now, we almost don't see what it offers us. We don't see its newness. I think when it was new and novel, we wanted to kind of explore what it could possibly do for us. And I think wikis are a really good example of that. I remember going to a conference in '98 and seeing Mark Goodsdale talk about wikis, and I came back and I was like a convert. Like, we've got to put everything in wikis. It's amazing. And obviously there's Wikipedia, which is kind of fantastic success now. But actually, we don't really use wikis a lot in education. And I think it's an interesting question to ask yourself now. Why aren't MOOCs in wikis, for instance? So we still, and I came across a course outline that Mark, I think, had put together, and all these different uses of wikis. And actually, it was a really kind of radical proposal for how you construct courses and how students share knowledge. A lot of that kind of stuff that Terry is talking about, students building on previous cohorts and working across different years and working together to create their kind of own content. And if you were to put it in now, that would be quite a radical proposal, I think. So again, I think some of that kind of experimentation got lost somewhere often. Which brings us into the kind of mainstreaming phase. So towards the end of the 90s, e-learning was a common term, and people were sort of moving towards it, and most universities recognised there was something there to explore. So my choice for 2002 was the VLE or the LMS. And around this time, lots of universities adopted different VLEs, so Moodle or Blackboard, those kind of things. And I think it was a kind of a Faustian pact in some ways, I think, adopting VLEs. What they allowed you to do was to move very quickly to a certain space in e-learning. So prior to VLEs, as Tim said, I was the VLE director at the OU, and we sort of, every faculty had their own set of technologies, which might be some guy in a basement who's put it together himself versus, and some might be some third-party software, some might be a collection of bits and bobs, so there's kind of big variety that going on around the university. And what having a VLE allowed you to do was to kind of move very quickly to get everyone to the same point. So you could roll out student support, staff support, you had kind of universal production methods, so you could put everything in the same platform. So that got us very far quite quickly. But then I think what happened was a lot of the institutional processes then began to cement around the VLE. So we began to have a roadmap for development. We began to talk about how are we going to do this in VLEX, or how are we going to do this in Blackboard, how are we going to do this in Moodle, rather than thinking about what it was we wanted to actually do. So it's almost like this sediment built up around the VLE. It became quite hard then to move beyond it. So we would have educators say, I want to do this. They said, well, we can't do that in the VLE, so therefore you can't do it. So I think it stopped some of that experimentation I talked about in the earlier phases. And around 2006, we had the explosion of what we call Web 2.0, and this kind of led to the inevitable internet boom and bust. And lots of these technologies don't exist anymore, because it turned out you did actually need a business model, and you couldn't just rely on lots of users. But I think what Web 2.0 did more fundamentally was make us, much like the initial web, it made us question some of the fundamental practices around that we hold dear in academia. So David Weinberger talks about filtering on the way out rather than filtering on the way in. We've developed all these systems that filter, so academic publishing is a really good example of that. We do peer review, and only when it gets past a certain quality is it published and allowed to go out there. Whereas filter on the way out means you publish most things, and then they get filtered, whether that's through references, whether that's through ratings, those kind of things. So, and I think that was quite interesting for us in academia, to think about what's fundamental that we want to keep and what can be adapted and changed. And so there's like the physics repository archive, where they will publish any paper, a preprint of a paper that looks like an academic paper. So it would be good enough to be sent out to view is the filter, but they don't actually review it and then publish it. And that's become one of the biggest sort of sites around. So it allows a much kind of quicker turnover of publication and knowledge sharing. And I picked Twitter for 2009. And I think Twitter probably leads more into the next session. So at the time, it was kind of really interesting, and what can we do with this platform? And I think the good things about it were that it really helped, like blogs, it helped kind of break down some of the barriers around education and the boundaries of the institution, if you like. So suddenly you could see academics behaving like human beings online, but that might not always be a good thing. But so I think that you kind of help blur some of those boundaries, and that I think that in general is a good thing. But as we know, it also has led to lots of other issues, trolls and Nazis and all sorts of things. And I think it raised a really big issue for us as academics about how much we encourage students or our colleagues to partake in this world. Because if it becomes that you need to have a Twitter profile in order to get the benefits, and there's all these kind of good things from it, then also you're pushing people into an area that kind of carries potential harm with it. Which brings me on to the critical pessimistic phase, I think, of EdTech, which I think is important. We've kind of moved from this isn't all great to let's be more critical about it. So I think this really began around MOOCs, around 2012, when suddenly MOOCs were everywhere, and everyone said, "Oh, suddenly developing online learning as if it never happened before. And many of us were just sort of like banging our heads against the wall. The idea that this stuff, was that new. And again, MOOCs are still struggling for a business model, but equally they're great. Also, there's like millions of people have learned online through these things. We don't want to say that's a bad thing, but I think the idea, as Sebastian Thrun said, that there's only going to be 10 providers of global education in the future. It just isn't borne out, and actually MOOCs really need universities to kind of operate carefully. And we soon found out that actually the people who succeeded in MOOCs were people who already had a good education. So this idea that they were going to democratize education just wasn't borne out. Learning analytics. So again, Terry talked about this. Analytics are interesting, I think, particularly for us in distance education. So we use them quite a lot in the Open University. So not necessarily a bad thing. And I think the sort of analogy I give is like if you're giving a lecture, actually a face-to-face lecture, so I can't see any of you at the moment, but if you're giving a face-to-face lecture, you can see if people are being bored or staring out the window, and maybe you'll change your approach and that kind of stuff. That's been really difficult to do in distance education. And so having some of that feedback, having some of that data allows us to change our courses, adapt if people are struggling in certain areas, that sort of thing. But also it comes with a whole wealth of issues around who owns that data, who's doing what, and how do learners feel about it. And I think some of that kind of analytics we're seeing around exam proctoring as well is particularly pernicious. And so the last year in the book is 2018. So I just labeled that EdTech's dystopian turn. I think it was kind of really when we could stop saying, you could be, the idea that you could be neutral about technology, EdTech, I think had really gone by then, and people could see a lot of the kind of damage and potential issues. So it really meant that we kind of had to tread a very kind of careful, balanced, nuanced line, I think, around our application of technology. So to quickly pull out some themes, I'm not sure what time I'm supposed to finish now, so we're running a bit late on it. I think over the 25 years I looked, you could argue that the technology part of ed technology was bigger, more significant. But I wonder if we're seeing a shift now, particularly with that kind of idea of criticality, that people are actually much more thinking about, okay, what's the educational potential of these things? I think, as I said previously in the last slide, I think innocence and neutrality is no longer a valid stance. You can't say, oh, well, it's just technology. Technology is neutral. How people use it is up to them, kind of thing. I think we need to think about how these things will be used. A lot of the time, they're very kind of pernicious and maladjusted use is entirely predictable. And we say, well, okay, if that's what's going to happen, how do we stop it? I think it's interesting to see these kind of recurring ideas and cycles of interest. So artificial intelligence comes up a lot through the history. And for instance, I did my PhD in artificial intelligence back in the 80s, the 90s, the early 90s. And even then people were saying, oh, it's going to get rid of teachers. You won't need teachers. We're going to have these intelligent tutoring systems. And about 10 years later, the same people would say that, said, well, actually, it was more complex than we thought about, and we didn't speak to educators. Well, big surprise. But now we're seeing that exactly the same idea again. And we can get rid of teachers. It's like just AI will teach everybody, which I think brings on to this idea of that. I think what comes back through a lot of these kind of looking back at history is what's the role of humans and how does technology relate to it in terms of the educational process. And I think it's more interesting. So I think some technologies seek to replace people and say, people are the expensive, inefficient part in the system. And other technologies, I think, seek to help educators. And I think it's the latter that are of more interesting, actually more viable for us. And lastly, I think I want that point I wanted to make to demonstrate this history of innovation. You can see that it does happen. And actually, there's been these kind of big, broad, wide-ranging innovations that have taken place that have come out of higher education, either developing technology or taking technology from elsewhere and adapting it for different use and that kind of stuff. So the idea that technology needs some kind of savior on a white horse to ride in and rescue it from the evil internet and not understanding the stuff just isn't true. If I've got time, I'll talk about in time of the pandemic. So I was joking on Twitter that, particularly at the start of the year, it felt like being in education technology suddenly felt like you were in the kind of the action movie version of that life, when you're suddenly getting called upon to do all these things. And who knew that, education technology would one day be a kind of emergency service? So I was joking that I wanted to be like one of those cops in a film who gets to hang off a helicopter and says, "I'm getting too old for this shit." So Brian drew me this little graphic. But suddenly, you know, EdTech became very relevant. It was the only way we could carry on operating for lots of people. But I think what that means is you're getting for lots of principals and vice chancellors, they didn't want to be running an online university. They're not prepared to run an online university. They want it to go away. So what they're looking for is someone who'll come along and sell them a magic solution. They'll say, you know, here's the big button that says go online and it'll all work for them. And people are going to be willing to sell that to them because they can get lots of money for it. So partly, I think it's really important now more than ever to understand what's gone before, understand what's worked and what hasn't worked and why for those things. Then you can ask sensible questions of these things. So I'll just give a couple of examples. So one of the things I saw was people saying, aha, look, exams are really problematic, and they're quite right. They're actually a weak point in the whole higher education system. So, you know, bringing all these people together at the same time, at the same place for real high stakes assessment is just really kind of not a very good thing to do. But there are other alternatives. Also, people saying, oh, you can use blockchain for assessment. So they can compile all these small tasks and put them on their blockchain. Well, okay, that sounds good, you know, but if you've got a knowledge of at least some history of the EdTech, you might ask, well, what does that offer me that an e-portfolio doesn't already offer me? And e-portfolios have been around for a long time and they haven't necessarily revolutionized assessment. So how will your blockchain for assessment overcome some of the problems that e-portfolios face? Because actually, the problem with e-portfolios, if there is a problem, I think they're pretty good, is not necessarily to do with the technology. It's to do with getting employers to recognize them or to get educators to adapt their teaching to break it up into small tasks. So it's got nothing to do with the technology. So blockchain isn't going to solve those problems for you. So I think, you know, just knowing that would be good to ask those questions of people if they're selling you a blockchain solution. The other thing I saw people talking about suddenly was, now we're all shifting online. Why don't we share content? You know, so at the end of the late 90s, one of the years I give over to is the idea of learning objects. And learning objects, the idea was, why are we all creating this content, you know, individually, when we could just create a few really good ones and share it between us? And learning objects went around for ages, and though they were a good idea, they never really took off. They were kind of over-engineered, and sharing content wasn't really something that academics were used to doing. So if you want to think about reusable content, it'd be well advised to look back at learning objects and think, what were the problems with them? Is there something different we can do to overcome them this time? And we've already got open educational resources. How best can we use those and adapt those? And perhaps lastly, the VLE and the LMS, you know, lots of people are jumping to new technologies, but most universities and institutions already have a VLE. You need to think about how you can move beyond it maybe, but actually the tech isn't your problem here. The problem is more likely to be training staff and giving staff confidence and skills in using the VLE in interesting and innovative ways that aren't just replicating the lecture and perhaps some of those pedagogies that Terry talked about. So in conclusion, am I on time? I'm not sure. There's a long history of EdTech innovation in education. It doesn't need saving. So anyone says to you, you know, there's a revolution coming and we're going to change higher education, you know, ask them in which way it needs to be changed or saved. And I think understanding some of this history is essential to making good decisions right now in the pandemic when we're facing lots of issues. So here's some fun stuff. So you can download the book there, free. I created a site where you can find, there's a timeline, you can get all the free images. There's even a Spotify playlist for 25 years of EdTech there. You can go to the Remixer site and remix the cover yourself. You can change the color and the text and that kind of stuff. The good people at Hypothesis have created an annotated version, so you can go in and tell me all the things that I've done wrong. And most excitingly, perhaps Clinton Lalonde is over the summer got in touch with me and said, can we do an audio book version of 25 years? And I said, that'd be great, you know, but I didn't want to read it. so I read a couple of chapters, but he put together a big community, so people reading one chapter each. I think Maha's in the audience. I think Maha reads a chapter. I apologise, Maha, for making you have to read one of my chapters, but that's going to start being released, I think, on November 4th or 2nd, something like that. I said there'd be like an audiobook version. And I think that's really exciting because that really demonstrates the power of it being an open resource, that we can do this. And then Laura Paschini has been doing a podcast about each of the chapters, so we can then talk about, not me, but other people talk about all the things that I've missed out and why it's rubbish, but that'll be released about each of the chapters. So there's kind of a whole kind of ecosystem around the book, which is good. If we want to discuss stuff, we have time. I thought we could talk about some of the reasoning behind the book, my motivations. You can tell me all the technologies I should have covered, some of those general themes, or the relevance to the pandemic, and particularly, I think, what your context is like, and how whether it might have relevance to what you're doing, or how if you could push it under someone's nose, it might help. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Martin, as ever. A very entertaining talk. I just love the T-shirt, by the way. I mean, not the T-shirt, the cartoon, sorry. I was going to say, I'm getting too old. I want that as a T-shirt. So.
There is a T-shirt. I should be wearing it. I'm not wearing it, but you can get a T-shirt, of course. Always with the merchandise.
Okay, we can leave the discussion stuff for the Q&A session afterwards. Just one question, if you'll permit me. There's this thing about educationalists who love to tell us that pedagogy comes before technology, like the horse and the cart thing. And that's probably true up to a certain point. But I mean, if you think about it also, change happens as a combination of evolution and revolution. So everything goes on quite nicely, and all of a sudden someone pulls the carpet out and it changes. I mean, an example which may or may not be that revolution is 5G that's coming on. I mean, that holds some possibly cool things. I mean, how do you see that fitting in? I mean, how do you see it historically, and what importance do you think it'll have in the future?
5G in particular, do you mean? Or?
Well, yeah, both things, the evolutionary, revolutionary thing, and 5G is an example.
Yeah, I think these things take a long time for us to realise what they're going to do, and it's rarely the thing we think they're going to do. So I think it's like with the iPhone. We had like mobile learning for a long time, but it was quite hard work. Often you'd have these kind of text-based interfaces, and you had to download a special app. No one really used it. It's like, but suddenly you've got this device that everyone's using all the time, and that makes kind of augmented reality. It's just, I think it's that lowering the threshold of people's application of these things and how easy it is to use. I think that's when it becomes quite exciting, when it's actually easy to do rather than something you've got to really sort of put people's minds to and do stuff. And maybe the pandemic is the big revolution. Suddenly all these people have shifted online and stuff. And I think Tony Bates has done some good analysis on that. And I think he's quite right to say it's not like everyone's going to carry on and teach everything online. But I think what will come out of it is with a much more kind of blended provision and stuff. So I think it's that almost like the kind of social acceptance of the stuff is the kind of bigger revolution, I think. Okay,
thank you very much, Martin. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A tool I'll leave you to answer, and move on to our final speaker, Maha Bali. She's an associate professor of practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. She's an editor at Hybrid Pedagogy Journal and an editorial board member of Teaching in Higher Education, online learning journal, Learning, Media and Technology in the International Journal of Educational Technology in Higher Education, and also the Journal of Pedagogic Development. She has blogged for the Chronicle of Higher Education's Prof Hacker, DM Central Blogs, and Al Fanar Media. She's the co-founder of Virtual Connection, Connecting.org, and co-facilitator of Equity Unbound. She's a former international director of Digital Pedagogy Lab. She was the 9th person interviewed on the Leaders and Legends of Online Learning podcast, and she was featured alongside 15 amazing women of the Open Movement in the Uncommon Women 2018 coloring book. She's a learnerholic, great term, writerholic, and passionate about open and connected educator. She tweets a lot at Bali Maha, and blogs a lot at her blog, blog.mahabali.me. And today she's going to talk to us about paradigm shifts we need in open and online learning post-COVID. Thank you, Maha.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you everyone for joining me today. After I named this keynote, I kind of felt like paradigm shifts is a very big word. So we'll talk about that again towards the end of this. First of all, assalamu alaikum. This is the Arabic for peace be upon you. It's a greeting. And I wanted to share this picture of flame trees that I used to see from my windows that cheered me up during COVID. And I like sharing, you know, colorful things and pictures in my slides because we've all got some bad days. My slides are available for commenting. You can comment on them now or anytime afterwards at bit.ly/Eden Valley. This is case sensitive. And before I get started, I know there are a few people here in the panelists and in the attendees. And could you type in the chat how you're feeling today? Tell me how you're feeling right now. And if you've been sitting for an hour or longer, you may need to stretch. I want you to be awake for this keynote because I'm going to ask you to participate. So let's see how many people are able to just share in the chat. How are you feeling today? I'm going to pause for a second while people do that. You're welcome for the stretch invitation. All right, I'm glad everyone's feeling well today. But it would be totally okay if you weren't, because some days in this pandemic are not as great as others. I hope you and your loved ones are safe and well. Good that you've had a walk, Jose, or Jose, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Good, but slothful. Yeah, that happens sometimes. Okay, so my journey for today, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to just talk you through how COVID-19 made me rethink a lot of what we consider to be good practice in open online learning, how it surfaced some important aspects of it, but I also, instead of just telling you what I've come to conclusions, is I also ask people on Twitter, because that sometimes sparks ideas for me that hadn't been clear to me. So I've been in the field of e-learning since 2003. I feel like I have to say this because the other keynotes are people like Terry Anderson, who sort of, and Martin Weller, who sort of invented e-learning, and Tony Bates. So I have to say I've been in this field for quite some time, although I guess I was at the early phases of being here. So I've been here for 17 years, right? But I've still had some paradigm shifts with COVID. It's changed my mind about a few things. And so just a quick question again to the audience. Is there something like when you hear, you know, COVID has caused a paradigm shift, did that happen to you? Type in the chat like some of the things that come to your mind. If you're going to say, what has COVID made me rethink? And the panelists like Martin and Terry, I hope you're here because I want to hear from you too. I don't know if you'd say you've said that in your keynotes already or not. I'll pause for a second and wait for the chat. It's going to be difficult for me to check Twitter, but I'm trying to check the chat. So. Hi, Lisa Marie. I'm sorry that Anna's feeling sadness. So Martin is saying that a massive uptake of online is going to be a paradigm shift of sorts. Alexandra, hi, Alexandra. People start sharing ideas and practices more. Hope this is here to stay. Yes, I agree with you. This has been wonderful to see. People who had not previously been sharing openly have started to much more than usual. And Jose says, extended the work already done with students. Rethinking social interactions, recognizing my immediate social circle. Oh, Day saying institution has been in panic. You have to find a new job. I'm sorry. I mean, the economic impact is not small on people's job stability sometimes. Terry saying that huge educational institutions can move swiftly. Yes, that's a good one. Usually they're so slow to get anything done. And then all of a sudden, oh, fun, you know, they've been resisting online learning for years and now all of a sudden they can do it and now it's okay. And it's the same quality and students should pay the same fees. So that's an interesting thing. Yeah, panic, I think was a normal reaction. I think probably those of us who are into e-learning for a long time were less panicked than everyone else, but it's understandable why everyone else would have been panicked. Rethinking how to teach primary students online. I think this one we need to spend a lot of time on, this young students. I have a daughter who's 8 and yeah, that's a big deal. And Deborah saying that we're not a niche field. I've been thinking of this too. Experiences, we had something that now everyone feels like they've now experienced online learning and they know how to do it. And like all this stuff that we've been learning for years is not relevant to them anymore. And we don't know something that they don't know anymore. That's true. And ambassador in the video conferencing is the only, yes, I'm going to talk about that. Yes. Yes. Widespread creation of resources. So that, yeah, I agree. That's a good thing. More teamwork, more design. Yeah, we're mainstream now. We're like the traditionalists now. We're not progressive anymore. Okay, I'm going to move on. So I did share on Twitter. For me, one of the main, it's not really a paradigm shift in the sense that it already existed, but the importance of the socio-emotional dimension of digital literacy is being more essential than usual. For me, I think it's more important not because it wasn't there. It was always there in online learning. The social aspect was always core to online learning. These constructivist and connectivist approaches to online learning are all about that. And we who have been in online learning have known about this forever. The difference is when we did online learning, we also had our face-to-face life going on at the same time. When I did my master's online, I had my full-time job where I went and I met people. I did my PhD where I met my supervisor a few times a year, but most of the time I went to work and I saw people every day. But with the trauma and the social distancing of COVID-19 plus the cognitive load of this very stressful time, the importance of teachers providing space for expressing and discussing their emotions and providing an emotionally safe space for students became more important for different reasons. And they were not equipped to do that. And that's why they felt like synchronous might be the way to do it. But I also believe in a lot of the importance of semi-synchronous third places, which I'll come back to in a minute. So this obviously, aside from the community of inquiry model, which all of us know about, there's also Cleveland Innocent Campbell in 2012 who talked about emotional presence separately from social presence, because if you're not careful, social presence can be just socialization without making room for the expression of emotion and care. And I think that there's value in separating those out. So socio and emotional, they're not one thing and they won't automatically both happen together. And then there was this other realization, which came up in several different spaces, but here Virginia Yonkers is mentioning it, is in online learning, we're very used to a lot of asynchronous, like synchronous was happening, of course, but online learning was usually designed to be mainly asynchronous, mainly flexible so that people can do whatever, whenever. But the synchronous became important, and a lot of us in e-learning were like, you guys don't understand, e-learning doesn't have to be like that. But in reality, because there was no face-to-face social, the synchronous had to be online. And so the social had to be synchronous online to a lot of people. And that a lot of undergraduate students, to be able to manage their time in this new mode of learning, in this trauma, they weren't ready for that. And actually, when you think about it, the teachers as well, because asynchronous takes a lot more time to manage and a lot more thought. And nobody had that time or the space to think about all of that. And so, yeah, because as Pauline Ridley is saying, there was no face-to-face synchronous, so you had to think about that. The other thing is, I was just saying asynchronous requires time management autonomy from students, and that's much more difficult for younger students. Building community was always possible online. It became more important than ever. But it's the ways in which, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, is just the ways in which synchronous was a lower cognitive load for people makes a huge difference. And we'll talk about the equity issues there. I'm going to be mentioning a lot of research that I've been involved in here, but I'm going to be touching upon it because for me, I think what was more important to spend my summertime was not doing research, even though I have a lot of research in the works, but I wanted to work on what people needed. And I chose to spend August creating community building resources for teachers who don't know how to do so online, because I realized that no matter how much I talk to them about how community building online is possible, and I try to send them resources, they needed to see it. And so this, if you haven't seen this resource, I'm gonna, whoops. All right, I clicked on it by mistake. I did not mean to do that, but that's not a bad thing. I'm going to try to type it into the chat so that folks can take a look at it. It just gives people ideas of resources of, how would you build community online, like specific resources they can look at and videos and adaptations and how would you adapt it if your students can't be synchronous and things like that. So I'm just wondering, for me, what was happening is people are going to be synchronous anyway. They don't know how to use it the best way possible. So why not give them ideas? If you're going to be synchronous, here are some ways to make use of that time together to really build community and really listen to students and make this experience interactive instead of getting online and just lecturing or doing breakout rooms, for example, but not giving students something very specific to do in the breakout rooms. And so One of the ways I do it is with using these techniques called liberating structures, which I will mention again later. But that's the important thing. If this is where people are at, if this is what teachers are willing to do, they're not willing to put in the time. And I understand it's not just an unwillingness. It's they don't have time, they don't have the cognitive space to design a proper online course in the ways that we've decided that online courses should be beforehand. Then let's make the best of what we have now and make the synchronous time count and make it matter and make it worthwhile. And those semi-synchronous third places are great because if you have something like a WhatsApp group or a Slack team or something or Google Docs, you're allowing people to participate synchronously or asynchronously, and that creates a kind of equity that you couldn't do. So even though asynchronous learning, of course, is more accessible in general for people with poor infrastructure or people whose time is not very flexible, like working parents and so on, synchronous does work better for many who can access it and on a socio-emotional level and lower cognitive load because not everyone knows how to manage their time or express their emotions online. And so this whole trauma-informed approach has been really helpful for me during this pandemic, and I learned from May Samed and Karen Costa about this. It's helped me as a teacher and as a mom and as someone who's also creating a lot of care communities for others. And to realize that we are in a pandemic now, probably when this is over, there will be a lot of emotional damage for a lot of people to different degrees. Obviously, it's not equally distributed, but this is a moment where everyone has a little bit of this, right? And that flexible online learning is better for everyone, not just for those who are disadvantaged. But then it's also important to think about equity literacy and that not everyone is in the same space, right? So first of all, what Tutaleni Asino was saying over here is that a lot of the divisions between developing and developed world are not useful so much right now. There is sort of the privileged and the less privileged in every space. So it's not that, yeah, I know, for example, there, and we'll talk about this later, there are rural spaces in Canada that don't have internet connectivity, where Cairo here in Egypt has good connectivity, but there are other spaces here that don't, right? Because online and the pandemic have not been equalizers. They've just actually revealed and reproduced a lot of inequalities and injustices, and you have to look at them in a lot of different spaces. But a lot of things that people who previously had been privileged, and Parisa Mehran is talking about passport privilege, the ability to move between countries and the mobility to do that. Now everyone knows how it feels not to be able to move from one country to another comfortably. And Paris is saying the world has always been COVID-ish for us. I think she made up that term. And so it's important when we talk about equity and social justice to look at all the different dimensions of it. There are the economic dimensions where we talk about a lot in EdTech about access to the technology and the devices, but there's also cultural and political dimensions. And when we talk about something like open educational resources and their existence, whose culture is represented in these open educational resources, and the political dimension of who has the right to choose how we will do things. So for example, a lot of institutions did move quickly online, but Terry was saying this, right? But at the risk or at the cost of not having a very good process of involving professors in the choice of how are we going to move online. And so sometimes institutions, including mine, initially would say, oh, we're going to teach you how to use the learning management system, the lecture capture system. And then teachers were like, but I don't lecture. How am I going to use this? And for me, it's very important to give teachers agency so that they can learn to give their students agency as well, and to make sure that cultural representation is equitably distributed and that marginal groups are represented. And so someone in the chat earlier, when Martin was talking about wikis, we mentioned Wikipedia. And one of the things about Wikipedia is that theoretically, of course, economically, it's a good space because it's a free encyclopedia, right? You don't have to pay to get there. As long as you have internet, you can reach it. But culturally and politically, it's problematic because we know that the representation of white male points of view and biographies and so on is much stronger there. And then who are the editors who have the political power to edit things out and to refuse biographies that you add are mostly also white males. So these are things to think about, even when we talk about something being open. And that there are a lot of resources shared. Which part of the world are these resources shared from? In which language is it shared? And who has access to that language? And then whose culture is represented in everything that we are now saying is open. So I'm just going to ask you to think about this. Like, what kind of example of pedagogies do you know or that have happened during the pandemic that you feel can empower or privilege one group in one context, but also disadvantage another group? So I'll pause for a second to see if people have something to share here. Okay, nobody's typing right now, but you can keep typing if you're thinking about these kinds of things. The paper that I mentioned over here by Rajiv Jangiani, Catherine Cronin, and myself talks about how open educational practices can seem to be promoting social justice for one dimension, but not in another. Synchronous sessions, yeah, exactly. I think synchronous sessions are definitely one of those spaces. Like everyone who has an internet connection probably finds it easier to do a synchronous learning experience than to do asynchronous. In Paris, people don't have other commitments. That's true. So people who have care work, time is not equal for people, right? Breakout sessions doing live events. If you have a very slow connection, the breakout sessions don't work out very well. You get disconnected sometimes. But otherwise, it's really enabling a better conversation, right, in smaller groups. I think you're right that all pedagogies in Power and Privilege one group day. It's what I'm saying is that sometimes you're doing something that is meant to promote equity, but then by mistake you're still going to miss someone in that process. I think it's a never-ending struggle, right? Inequalities become more obvious. I agree. As soon as you start putting technology, it's not that inequalities weren't there, but they're stronger. So, for example, in South Africa, some of the inequalities became really obvious because people had at least access to technology and internet on campus, and then suddenly they didn't. So the fact that they lived in homes that didn't have good internet became more obvious, or they didn't have their own devices became more obvious. Yeah. All right, and some icebreaker activities. Thank you, Martin. So in our community building resources, we have a section called Safety Considerations, which Kate Bowles gave and wrote. And she's talking about even when you're doing a community building activity that maybe 90% of people will enjoy, there will be some people for whom it's unsafe, and you have to be really careful about how to do that. And Terry's saying men dominate synchronous online conversation as they usually do F to F. Yes, they dominate everything. That's true. All right, so context is really necessary for any discussion about all of this. Same action or intervention can marginalize one group, privilege another. This is a doodle by my daughter, who is bilingual. She speaks English and Arabic. And in Arabic, you can read from right to left or from left to right. And when I saw this doodle, I asked her, which direction are you supposed to read it? And she said, well, if you read it from right to left, this is the story. And then if you read it from left to right, this is the story. So she has two stories going at the same time. And I think we need to have room in our postmodern brains to recognize that this story looks different from different directions, from different angles, depending on who you are. Sometimes the thing that's really working well for the teacher isn't working well for the student, or the thing that is working for one student obviously is not working for another. I know I'm overemphasizing this, but it's really important to just keep thinking about the ways this is happening. And so, for example, talking about economic injustice and how that can influence cultural injustice as well. I'm thinking about Indigenous populations in Canada. These are shared by Tanis Morgan and Tanya Elias, and ways in which, if you see the image on the right, this is an actress who is from, I don't know how to pronounce this, Iqaluit tribe, I'm guessing, in Canada, one of the Indigenous tribes. And she barely made it to the deadline to make it, to apply for, to have a role in a movie. So the fact that her internet is slow was stopping her from even just applying for the opportunity that she wanted to be part of. And this one, the other one from Tanis Morgan, this Casey, who's a digital innovator, is able to create artwork using virtual reality, which represents his culture. But most people from his own culture don't have a fast enough internet connection to benefit from what he's doing. That's what he's talking about in that video. So it's really important to think about that. And one of the funny things that happened during this Twitter conversation is that they kept talking about how the North is reaching the world. And in my context as a global South person, the North is the dominant white male type of culture, but they were actually talking about the Northern Territories in Canada, the Northwest Territories in Canada, who are less privileged and less reachable because they're, so it's very interesting that just using even the geographic term North is tricky, right? So you need to be very careful. This is one of my favorite diagrams. You've probably seen it or seen one similar to it before, differentiating equity and equality, and the importance of trying to ensure that we don't forget equity while we're just focusing on equality. But I think not everyone wants an apple, so it's important to offer something different. And that sometimes someone is privileged in one way, but maybe they need care, not apples today. So just think about that. The important thing is to give people parity of participation, give them the choice to choose what they want, and don't just give them the crumbs. I love this quote by Desmond Tutu. I think giving students and teachers the full menu of rights, but also letting them choose their own menu and their own ingredients. And don't just tell them, oh, this is what you're going to get. Now choose from what I've given you. You need to allow them to choose what they want to include. So when institutions tell teachers you have to use only the LMS, that's highly problematic. Like maybe they have another way to engage students that better fits their own teaching philosophy. I'm going to run through the intentionally equitable hospitality aspect. This is a paper that I co-authored with my colleagues at Virtually Connecting, and it's about the teacher as the host and making sure they listen. Who do they listen to as they design their courses, and making sure you set the intention to be equitable, because it's not going to happen by coincidence. And that the equity aspect means paying attention to each and every student's needs and not all students, which is a lot of hard work. But how do we research this stuff, and whose stories and on whose terms are we doing this? And I believe that autoethnography is one of the best ways to research this kind of thing, because there's a lot of ambiguities and uncertainties, and a lot of things are happening online and offline. It's not just online. If you research only public Twitter, you don't really know what's happening in the private conversations, and you don't know what's happening offline away from Twitter altogether, that you cannot research in that way. So I've got a chapter on doing autoethnography on the internet recently published that talks about this. And the assumption is that you cannot categorize people. The other is never fully knowable from afar. You don't even fully know yourself, but at least you can express where you're coming from and why you're doing things in certain ways. So for example, when COVID happened in Egyptian schools, they started to assign projects instead of exams, which sounds like very good pedagogy, right? It's more authentic. They're learning research skills, which is like, wow. But actually, neither the teachers nor the students had ever done this before. Nobody knew how to do this. Nobody was prepared to do it. And suddenly they had to learn to do it during a pandemic where the teachers couldn't explain to students how to use the internet properly, how to use scholarly resources or anything. So it was a nice idea, but in practice, it was highly problematic. Another thing that I think became really important for me during COVID was the importance of local and open professional development. Like there's no reason not to open up a lot of what we do for professional development to people from other countries, or at least even locally across institutions. And this is a research I did with Daniela Gashago and Nicola Pallet from South Africa, which was a collaborative autoethnography about no size fits all, where it's a little similar to what Terry and John were doing in terms of like looking at different dimensions of what an online or networked experience could be. But in ours, we were saying like, these are different dimensions. And a course can be any of those things. And it's really important to, first of all, recognize that different teachers may need different amounts of freedom and amounts of structure in order to learn, right? Do they have an autonomous learning path, or do we all need to follow the same path, for example? Or is there something in between, like a dual pathway? It's important to think about these things. And that a course can be process or content centric. And this applies both to professional development and the courses that teachers teach as well, right? So the important thing is, how can we, if we are people who are supporting others to teach online, how can we give them choice and give them multiple pathways? And Matt Crossland has experienced this and has experimented with this in several different ways, and he's talked about it. And Autumn Keynes and I have published about the importance of promoting equity and ownership and agency in faculty development using connected learning, and then using that as the way to help teachers learn, and how we model for teachers giving choices to their own students. I know I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to skip these particular examples and just talk about whose labor are we valuing in this pandemic. This has been always important, but more visible, I think, and some things of it are invisible. I have a lot of respect for teachers and professors who managed to go online with little or no preparation for this. These are traumatic times, and they've had family and psychological and additional pressures. So it has not been an easy time to adapt to something completely foreign to a lot of people. But then how much agency and support did institutions offer teachers in order to embody their own teaching philosophy online so that it's not a horrible experience for them and their students? And when we talk about alternative assessments, it's really, I strongly agree that we want people to do alternative assessments rather than standardized tests and proctoring, but how much help does it need to change someone's mindset in the midst of a pandemic to rethink something so big that they hadn't thought about before, even though it's good pedagogy, even though I think they should keep doing it beyond the pandemic. It was just a difficult time to do this. But I also want to recognize something really important here, and I'm sure a lot of you are in this situation where you are the administrative staff who are really keeping the ship afloat. So it's not enough to thank the teachers for the work that they've done. There's been a big burden of shifting online on people who are EdTech experts. And they're they're visible to the teachers, but sometimes administrators or people outside are looking at the teachers and not looking at the amount of work we've been doing to support the work online. So this quote is from Laura Chernovich and a lot of others in South African institutions, talking about the shift to online and the kind of work that's been going there. And it's not just that we've given them training on how to go online. We've been doing a lot of effective labor. We've been educational developers caring for the teachers so they can care for students. Part of it is just to keep them going, but it's been a lot of pressure on us too, right? And we still have to care for our own families, so it's not been easy. And that's why centering our values has become really important. I think both Terry and Martin have mentioned this, that EdTech is not neutral and technologies can reinforce, reproduce, or amplify things like cultural surveillance, control, inequalities. So which of your values have become central during this pandemic? If you have bandwidth to write about this, type it in the chat. I'm about to finish. Virna Rossi was talking about the importance of centering pedagogy of care, and Tanya's again talking about how education systems are heavily centered around control. And it's really important as teachers who don't do that, who want to keep doing this, is this really what they want to teach their students? Are we preparing learners for the world as it is, especially when we talk about academic integrity? Are we preparing the learners for the world as it is, or are we preparing them to be agents who can imagine the world as it could be? And so for me, if you can say that you want to prepare students for a horrible world and a cruel world out there, or you can help them become people who will make that world a better place. And it sounds very idealistic, but I think every teacher has the responsibility and room to sort of think about how to do that. I'm going to leave you with these quotes about hope. My voice is disappearing on me, so I'm just going to put them up on the screen and not read them out loud. Okay, I've coughed a little bit and had a drink of water. Thinking about how hope is so important to have right now, but it sometimes can feel wrong because you might be supporting a broken system. There's a lot happening in our institutions that we may not be happy with. And it's difficult to even know what's right and what's wrong and what's the best way forward. And then I think the importance of having communities and continue to be critical of systemic injustice, but still to be insistent about hope, and then hope for probably equity-oriented change. I hope is something that a lot of us still hold hope for, and hope is not a passive thing that you just have and just do nothing about. If you have hope for something to change, like think about what it is that you can do to bring about the changes that you're hoping for. And I am about to finish now. Yes, I think it's a beautiful quote from Laura et al. So there's I think 20 authors for that article that I'm quoting over here. Yes, all the evil came out. At the bottom, there was hope. I love that, Anna. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that about Pandora's box. All right, thank you very much for listening. I think I just took my time.
Thank you very much, Ma. Very, very interesting and engaging presentation. I think a lot of the sentiment there is things we can really identify with these times that we're in at the moment. Just one quick question before we move on to the question and answer session, when you'll have another opportunity to answer more questions. And that was really about, of all the stuff you've written, one of the things I particularly liked was your pedagogy of care. And when you updated it for the COVID edition, and because we've been using, in my group, we've been using MOOCs for working for social inclusion with refugees, for example, and we could really identify that. One thing I would like to ask you about, though, is how do you see the scalability in this kind of approach to online learning? Because what you can do with a small number of students in terms of empathic identification of emotional states, it's kind of a lot harder when you've got large numbers of students.
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. So yeah, this kind care does, it's a good question, right? I think care doesn't scale in the sense that one person cannot show the same amount of care to 1 million people, but I think care distributes. So you can distribute the care so that there are small, small communities of 10 people who are caring for each other and supporting each other. I think it seems like we're putting maybe pressure on students to do that for each other sometimes, but I think that's the kind of human being I think they should be. So if you're working in a large institution, you want the professors in the department to support each other, not just to require that support from the president of the institution, right? If you're working in a large faculty that has different sub-departments. So in the same way, I think with students, if you're teaching 200 students, of course you can't pay attention to every single one of them. You can do surveys and you can find out roughly what's happening, but you can also encourage both having teaching assistants, but also encourage the two students with each other and create spaces for them to support each other and make time for that. So you can make the time or design the spaces that promote that. And so doing something like a Slack team and giving them different channels to work on where you're not as a teacher participating in every single thing. Making breakout groups and maybe making them consistently in the same breakout rooms for some sessions in a row, asking them specifically to give peer feedback, asking them specifically to ask about each other. Those are the kinds of things I think. So just distributing that care, delegating. I think this was something I think Terry mentioned, is delegating the care down. So that it's happening everywhere and not the responsibility of just one person who has a lot of power, but just the responsibility of everyone. I hope that helps.
It does. That was very, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we're moving on to the question and answer session now. So if the speakers can reactivate their cameras and microphones, and I'd also like to ask my my colleague Josep Duarte to do the same. You just popped out there, Terry.
Yeah, I had to turn that light off. Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Right. Okay, let's get going then. The talks have all been very interesting, and I think we've seen a lot of topics over the last few days about the role of EdTech in and online learning and stuff in this time of the pandemic. I mean, how do you think the what we've seen and what people are doing is gonna play out over the next series of months and years? Because depending on when the vaccination becomes available, we might be at the beginning of next year, quite possibly the following year before we will have it. So I mean, a lot of teachers have been forced online, kicking and screaming. So I mean, how can we see now they're beginning to get a taste for it? Do you think this is going to affect the way they work, or do you think with time a lot of people just go back and do things the way they did before? Okay, can I start with Terry there, please? Sure.
Well, I imagine that the teachers will run back to the campuses and be, thank God this is over, kind of feeling. A lot of them will, but I think they might have a lot less students in front of them, because I think people start to realize that the options that are available with online learning, that they are starting to realize, that wasn't such a bad thing. I could stay home and look care of my mom or my kids, or keep my job, or blah blah blah. And they're starting to, sort of, it's opened. Certainly it's opened teachers' eyes, but the impact on the students, and then especially in North America, where we're and maybe globally, where we're really driven by students' bucks and how many are enrolling, and I think it's going to be a sort of long-lasting impact.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you could be right there. Martin, do you want to add anything?
I mean, I think Terry's right. I think there'll be a mixture of reactions. I think there'll be a backlash, and we'll go, "Oh, we tried that online. It was terrible. Let's go back to face on campus." I think other people, and I think particularly learners, will enjoy some of the flexibility. I hate to be one of those speakers who extrapolates from a sample of one, but my daughter's at university now at the moment, and she's like the first year. She texted me the other day like, "I've got a 10 o'clock lecture. I got up at 10 to 10. It's great. Why weren't we doing this all the time?" So she's enjoying it. But I think to go to Maha's talk, I think what might be more impactful is just, I think, the kind of mental health impact on all this stuff, and where we feel and where we sit at the end of it. More seriously, I'm in Wales. We're just going into a second lockdown now, and I think the second one feels a lot tougher than the first one. It's like you're not sure when it's going to end. So I think when we come out at the end of it, there'll be a long tail of effects. I think very kind of human effects. Think of how we conduct education and those kind of things.
I'll just jump in right away. Yeah. So I think one of the issues, is the trauma of experiencing online learning during a traumatic time, and a lot of people's minds will be tied together. Whether or not you had a good teaching or online experience, is just that online learning will remind a lot of people of the pandemic, and I'm kind of worried about that on a subliminal level. I don't think on a conscious level even. But I do, from teachers and my institution especially, because I think we did a good job helping them out. Those who did come for help, we spent the whole summer teaching them how to teach better online and engage students and things like that. A lot of them are coming back and saying, a lot of what I've learned, I'm going to use even when I go face to face. So it's not that they're planning to teach online more, but to teach face to face better and to make better use of technology when they can. And I think students may be feeling different again because of the socio-emotional aspect that they're missing. But the dimension that I think will, I hope, definitely continue without any bad effects is this global local professional development thing, where it's going to be, in the past, when someone invited me to a keynote, and everyone knows this, I would only say yes to about 1 out of 10 because I couldn't travel all the time. Now, because everything's online, I can't say no because I can do all these keynotes. And I'm thinking about like this space where you have Terry from Canada and Martin from the UK and myself from Egypt. It's much more expensive to do this face-to-face all the time. And those of us who do online stuff, and of course, Eden is one of them, we do a lot of these things all the time online. You're doing more of them, and everyone's doing them, and in all the communities are doing them, and you're seeing the value of this global kind of communication, and we're learning how to do it better too, because it used to happen before and it's getting better, it's getting more engaging. So I think that one I hope stays forever. It sort of promotes a lot of equity in the professional development of educators who don't normally, either because of their location or their finances, could not attend as many of these.
Yeah, that's a good point. I must admit that I've also got 3 children in education in different stages, 2 in university, 1 at school, and it's hard because you're giving support on one stage while you're trying to teach on the other. So it's actually difficult. Okay. So we've been forced online, and things are moving a lot quicker. And I heard someone over the past couple of days say that that's actually caused an acceleration that we've seen in the way that EdTech has been adopted, that may have taken perhaps 5 years or more to have been undertaken in ordinary conditions, which is presumably a good thing. But what I'd like to ask you, and Maha, we'll start with you. Do you think that we'll see the quality of the process and our techniques evolve at the same way, or will we still be blundering on in the same way we are at the moment?
The quality of the techniques where in this, just the online learning we're doing during the pandemic, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I would hope people are still learning from, there's this combination of people learning from their experience and from their colleagues, and the sharing that others have said has increased over time. And at the same time, the exhaustion and the situation like you're in, like having children and working and doing all of that might become more exhausting. It might become more of a burden. But I do think I think what I'm seeing, so this is theoretically speaking, I was worried that this would not be happening. But what I'm seeing around me is that anyone who's been trying to make an effort has been getting better at this. There are a few people who are still resistant and not getting better at it. Perhaps institutions will get better at trying to reach people who don't want to be reached. Because in the past, a lot of us who work in educational technology, we only worked with people who signed up for online or blended learning because they wanted to do it for a reason that they knew either they believed in it or there was a good logistical reason. Now everyone has the reason, but it's not a reason they chose. And so some people have been open-minded about this and some people have not. And the ones who have not, and they're continuing to just stick to whatever they want to do, I don't know if that's I don't know what we can do about that, really. I don't know if Terry and Martin have ideas for this.
Okay, Terry?
Yeah, well, I think that if you look at the example of the examination assessment, high stakes tests that have been the bread and butter for institutions for years, and especially in our distance ed world, you see armed guards going out with the exams and this sort of thing. But they don't really work very well online. And so what am I going to do? Have no assessment? That's not acceptable. So, that kind of impact, I think will be positive pedagogically anyways.
Okay. Martin?
Yeah, I think it's been covered really, but I think what you see is some educators will be thinking, okay, and I think perhaps more institutions than anything, if institutions start to think, even if it's not, even this pandemic goes away, there might be other ones, or there might be other factors. It might be, Terry talked about, trying to think about climate change and bringing people in one place. So I think we might see institutions starting to think, how do we devise a more robust system? And I mentioned that, the exam is a weak point in that, but I think also just having everyone come to one place. I think trying to develop a more blended approach would be something that institutions start to push, and then I think a lot of educators will come on board then. And I think lots of them will have enjoyed some of the experience as well, being able to teach online, and they'll want to kind of get better with it, and I think just like a lot of students will think, actually, I quite like giving lectures from my house, but they might want to do different things, and they'll get feedback from students. So I think, you'll have some of that feedback coming through. So I think it will take sort of 2 or 3 iterations to get there, but it depends, as Maha says, whether people are just exhausted by that time and just don't have the capacity.
Yeah.
Can I just follow up quickly on something Maha said earlier, that, this fact that we can do professional development at a distance at a much lower cost now than we could in her keynotes example. But I wonder if we reflect on that, how many people are at this Eden workshop conference and registered? And I don't know, actually. Is it a lot more or a lot less? I see 45, 50 people at the closing. I can't remember. I thought it was bigger, but then of course things change besides just going online. But to repeat what I said earlier, I guess at the start, is that I think we really seriously have to think about how we support distance learners or online learners and teachers in our professional organizations, and try to find ways to make the online conferences work better.
Yeah, there's I don't know the exact number, but there's several hundred registered at the conference. But I mean, I've been to quite a few online conferences since March, April, and it's been difficult because in some ways it's a bit of a luxury going off to a conference, because you put your life on hold. You say, bye-bye kids, bye-bye, you don't have to worry about attending your students or anything. You're at a conference, and it's just absolutely wonderful, because it's all the informal conversations over coffee and stuff, and just being cocooned from this environment. And when you do this online, it's actually really hard, because I could tell you all the horror stories I've personally had when you're trying to moderate or give a talk, and then suddenly somebody opens the door and the dog comes in and he's jumping up on you because he wants a biscuit, and you can't pay any attention because you've got lots of people trying to listen to you, and your concentration goes, and it's difficult. It's actually difficult. Okay, so I think this is interesting what Martin was saying. I mean, in a way, our institutions do need to support us. I mean, perhaps. I'm at a distance university, or similar to the one that Martin's at. So, I do feel supported. I'm definitely not going to say that I don't, but I'm not sure that's always the case. We did these webinars in Eden for online in times of pandemic, and with some of the feedback we were getting from the people who were connecting in, is they didn't really feel supported. If we're going to be moving towards this new normal, or whatever you want to call it, and we're not necessarily going to be going back to the way we were teaching and interacting before, what kind of support should our institutions really be giving us? Ma, would you like to start?
Yeah, one of the things, it's sort of related. I was responding to Terry actually, but I think it helps respond to yours as well. When I say global, so I'm not talking about completely global. One of the things that we thought had been useful is I was part of a global thing called DigPins. It's a kind of connected learning, but with some support type of professional development experience that's a month long. And what we had is, you had a person from each institution who's responsible for the cohorts from their institution. So they have that local support. And then you had activities where they interacted with people from all over the world, some of them synchronous and some of them asynchronous, and you could dip in and out. And having that agency, but some structure, and then also some local support. So we met sometimes just the local folks, and then sometimes with everyone else, and going back and forth between those layers, I think is one of the things to keep in mind, because I think what we've got right now is we're all bombarded by so much professional development. I have 3 conferences this week. Yeah. And today I just came from like a full day workshop into this keynote. So yeah, it's a little bit crazy, and I can't focus on what you're talking about. Focus, not even with my kid around or not around, just the ability to focus in general. I think with the pandemic and just being online all the time is just. So I think we do need to think about, like, one of the things we're doing in my department is saying we're going to do half-hour workshops, whereas in the summer we were doing 3-hour workshops, intensive. When the semester started, people started to know, and we're like, oh, let's do half-hour workshops. Like, just teach me one thing in half an hour, and then we can go. So those are things I think we need to keep iterating on.
Okay, thank you. Terry, what do you think, the work-life balance and how to manage this stress?
Well, I'm retired, so I'm not really in a position to comment with much authority on that. But yeah, it is true. But I pick up on Maha's point that this idea of having a local group, you know, sort of to allow that kind of collaborative construction of knowledge and meaning, but have it enriched by people from Egypt or from anywhere, or Iqaluit, or anywhere in the world, I think is really useful for all of us. So a good point.
Thanks, Martin.
On the work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think what working at home is revealing is lots of things that we kind of took for granted before. Bad things as well. Like, so I live in Cardiff, for instance, and I used to go up once or twice a week to Milton Keynes, which is about 150 miles away. And I did that drive the other day to go and see someone, and I thought, I'm not doing this drive anymore. Like, I'm not spending 6 hours of a day in a car, like stuck on motorways and stuff. And it just felt awful. And it kind of felt like bad for my mental health. And also, often you're doing it when you're tired. You know, there's lots of kind of, you know, stats on, you know, accidents that are caused by tiredness and drowsiness. I think, like, we'll be doing all this stuff, and the amount of time wasted. So I think it reveals those kind of things, but at the same time, it also reveals plenty of kind of inequality. You know, like people who don't have a nice office they can sit in separately, like I do, or you know, I haven't got young children and stuff. So I think it's like all this stuff. So I'm coming around to the point of view there's good and bad to it, which is a bit of a twee conclusion, but I think it's interesting. I know, but I think what is interesting are the kind of things we just took for granted, or spending thousands of pounds a year to commute on trains in a miserable setting to go into an office where you sort of couldn't get any work done. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. No, Maha, you didn't answer that one question. That was a good answer you gave us. Okay, so I mean, what's in some respect, maybe it's because we're educationalists and we're at an educational conference where we're somewhat myopically focusing on what's happening in our particular area. And or maybe at least I am, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but we're kind of assuming that we're teaching and training our students so that once we get over this minor hiccup, they'll be back to normal in going into their companies every day and working in the old-fashioned way. Do you think there's going to be some kind of if you like, transition from the way they were working before to a new way of working that's actually reflecting what we're teaching them? So in a way, we don't have to feel guilty about using all these online techniques to teach them, because that in itself is a useful skill for them in their professional life. Martin, do you want to pick it up first?
Yeah, I think that sort of links back to the point I was just making before. I think, you know, I think actually lots of people will be looking to be able to work from home after this, you know, and I think, you know, it will be a good year now before many of us go back into campus or into offices. You think, well, if I've been doing my job perfectly well for all that time, why is it you need me to be in the office now? So I think lots of people will want that flexibility, and I think others will really want to be in an office and have that kind of social life. You know, I think it'll be a mixture, but I think you open it up for different people to apply for jobs when you sort of get to work online and be home based. So I think, you know, you're absolutely right. You know, there's a certain skill and responsibility in organising your time, being able to study, you know, when the architecture doesn't do that work for you, I think. And so those kind of skills will be sort of mapped across a lot to be able to work remotely, which I think will be much more the norm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Terry?
Yeah, I just picking up on Martin's example of the commute. I'm glad I'm not an investor in commercial office space, because there's a lot of people who are just not going to go drive 2 hours a day for a commute, especially when they now realize, and their bosses realize, that this can work. That doesn't mean that they're not going to come for the Christmas party and to enjoy a little social interaction with their colleagues, but they're going to realize that you can separate the two and achieve a balance for you personally, but as well a balance that will enhance your productivity or your learning or your teaching.
Yeah. That's a good observation. Maha?
I was just saying, Deborah, in the chat saying that there was a recent survey in the UK where only 7% of HE students thought working online with other students was useful. But I think that's probably because they've just not had a good experience of it. But I do tell my students, you know, even before COVID, if you work in a multinational context, you will need to interact with people online, and you will have to figure out ways to learn with others online, even if there wasn't any of this. The other aspect of it is that not only, I think the important part is that the employers are realizing that remote work actually is valuable, whereas before there was a lot of resistance to remote work, right? Like they're not sure what the employees are going to be doing. Now they know that employees can do it, and they let them do it. And so this is a kind of freedom that students would have in the future if they only, you know, could take advantage of it, and they'll know the value of it when they are no longer young, and when they have families and they have these other responsibilities, and when they want to study, you know, when they want to work and study at the same time. Once they start to have that multiple, right now they don't have that, so I don't think they can imagine why it's so important. Some of them do, obviously, if they're mature students, but you know, younger students may not realize the value of it until later. So I try to bring that into my class right now and tell students, you know, actually you realize this is going to use this later. And for example, I don't force my students ever to turn their camera on, but I told them, you realize that maybe in your future you will need to present something online to people. So you need to start getting comfortable with that. How can we work towards that so that when you have to do it in a high stakes context, you're not nervous anymore about it, for example.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I saw Deborah's comment as well, and I think that's very interesting. But I think that tells us more about perceptions of students to begin with, because I mean, there are a lot of skills there. I mean, I used to teach on a computer science degree, and you know, computer scientists are notorious for being really bad communicators, and we were aware of that. So what we used to do was we had a particular subject which was about producing a TV program, because that's something where you really have to work together. And some of the people we used to get to go in front of the camera, and they completely freak out. But it was wonderful because they'd end up, you know, effective communicators at the end. And I've also noticed it in another context where we're teaching language learning online as well, because the students love to do the exercise, but they're not very keen on correcting each other's work. And you're saying, hey, but that's half the value of what you're actually doing. Okay, right. I'm aware that time's coming out. I'm also how tired you are, so I'm not going to make you suffer too much more. I'd just like to have, if you will, please, one last wrap up, go home comment from each of you. So Maha, if you'd like to go first, please.
Oh, wow. Last comment. I've got a brain block. You know what? This is what I'm going to say. Pick the things that fulfill you for the next few months, because you've probably been working hard for the past 6 months or so. If you come to a professional development event, if you find that it's not fulfilling you, just leave. It's not rude to leave things online. Nobody's going to see you walk out the door. Just do the things that make you happy in these days, because it's a hard life.
Indeed it is. That's a wonderful sentiment. Maha, thank you very much indeed. Martin, your last thought?
It's a bit of a curveball you've thrown us at the end.
Oh, absolutely. You should know me.
I'm glad you went first with Maha. Yeah, I think mine would be, take care of yourselves. Don't be too hard on yourself, I think, you know. And if you find your productivity isn't what it was in normal times, you know, don't worry about those things. I think it's all good at the moment, so just look after yourselves.
Okay, that's great. And lastly, Terry, can we have your gem of wisdom to leave us with, please?
Well, I will do all the wonderful things we were saying about synchronous, and here I'm struggling with trying to think of something profound enough to end the session. So, but I'll pick up on Maha's comment about hope. At the University of Alberta, they have a Hope Institute, and they sort of drive research in what hope does, not medically, in all sorts of ways. But if we're going to be effective change agents, we can't be gloomy and talk about all of the challenges and all of the terrible things. We have to, you know, keep hopeful.
Wonderful sentiment. Thank you very much to our three speakers. I'll give you a round of applause because I know that everybody else can't really do that. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to our next session, the Lisbon 2020 report, the research on ODL's state of the art and the fair world. So I'm going to ask my colleagues Alan Tate and Ines Gil Gaurena to turn on their cameras, please. And
Team, I can't put the video.
oh, I'm sorry, Maria. Can you give Ines permission to turn her camera on, and also Alan as well, please?
Yes, of course.
Just a second, Ines. You'll be able to do that now. Oh, and Maxime as well, of course. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Hello. Hi, Maxime.
How are you? It's been a long time. Lovely to see you.
Okay, Ines, over to you.
So should I start? Is Alan here?
Yes, he was. Alan, let me just check. Yes, he was. Alan? Just checking the attendance.
At the moment, I think Alan is not here. Let me check, please. But I think not.
So Alan is not here at the moment, so I guess you have to start, Ines. And
Okay, no problem. Well, just for introduction, I was asked by Antonio Teixeira to be the co-rapporteur of this research workshop with Alan Tate. And it has been 2 really intense days and very interesting. And I could draft my report that I will read now at the end of the morning. So I really enjoyed this last session more than the previous ones because I was like free of that role, but I would like to incorporate also some of the issues from this last session. We have prepared 2 independent reports and we will work together afterwards. So I think they are complementary. Alan is here. I don't know if he wants to start or should I go ahead?
I've got no video at the moment. In the video.
Maria, can you activate his video, please?
Yes, we are trying to do it. One moment.
it's done. I have to do it myself. You can connect the camera, Alan.
It's still got let's just see if that will work. Ah, brilliant.
Hello.
There we go. Hi, hello all.
I was just introducing what we were doing, but I didn't start with the report. So if you want to start, as you wish.
Okay, shall I go? So thank you for inviting me back, and great to see Maxime Jean-Louis, an old colleague and friend, I think I dare say. And thank you for the chance, Antonio, to work with Ines in giving a sort of report. We decided to do this independently, so to speak, to give 2 independent perspectives. We thought that will be more interesting than a coordinated report. So if I kick off, the first thing I want to say is what an extraordinary achievement this 2.5 days has been in COVID times. It's provided such an enormously important element of continuity for Eden research and professional community. So Antonio Teixeira, I think you must take a bunch of flowers virtually, you and your team, along with the Eden Secretariat for this extraordinary achievement. It must have been so much work. I've never spent 2.5 days online before solidly, although we've all had 8 months of Zooms and Teams. We haven't been in the office or on the campus since the end of March. It's not been a time of community, but this has felt like a time of community, and it's been very, very welcome. But it's been hard work. My goodness, 2.5 days online is hard work. But there's a genuine sense of Eden community coming through to me during this meeting, and it's great great to be back. And when I look at who has been here, there's very widespread participation across Europe as well as further afield. And so it's great to see that Eton continues after 30 years to achieve its mission. I've been very struck by how many participants have been working, European participants are working in other European countries than their own, as on an expatriate basis. And it's such an impressive vision of a multilingual, multicultural professional community, highly skilled in intercultural working, which is a 21st century skill which is too often unremarked. And the conference has provided plenty of evidence that investigation and inquiry with a focus on practice continues in our field across a very wide field of research and scholarship. And I came across too many wonderful parallel sessions in particular, and I'm not going to have a chance to mention them all, so sorry about that. I've tried to frame my thoughts following Boyer's understanding of research and scholarship, which you might remember. It must be 30 years old now, but I think it still remains contemporary. And he talked about 4 categories of research and scholarship: the scholarship of discovery in your own discipline, the scholarship of integration that involves a synthesis of information across disciplines, the scholarship of application that goes beyond the duties of a faculty member to communities outside the university or college, and a scholarship of learning and teaching that involves a systematic study of teaching and learning processes. And I think we've had examples of all those kinds of scholarship during this meeting, but it's just a framework. See if you can place the examples that I select within that framework, or use it to assess your own selection of what's been interesting within those 4 categories. So let me first of all focus on the major themes that have struck me during this conference. And the first theme I pull out has been the obvious one, the COVID crisis and the move to online, the online pivot for campuses all around the world. And I think the president of Eden, Sandra Kuchina, set the tone at the beginning of the conference when she reported that 60% of school and college students worldwide have undertaken online learning for the first time. I mean, that is an extraordinary phenomenon and an extraordinary number of people. And Tony Bates, who's from Contact North, Maxime Jean-Louis' own organization, it reported at the beginning of the meeting on a large survey of Canada and USA of what had been happening during this COVID pandemic. And Tony forecasted a rise in Canada of something like 10% currently from learning online to 25 to 30% in the next 5 years. So that's a forecast which we will enjoy watching to see if it happens. He also said that he thought hybrid learning or blended learning will become the norm. And this throws up the need for systematic training for faculty, which may be a responsibility that falls in part to Eden, of course. And lastly, he made a very interesting remark, which struck me as having a lot of truth in it, that how important it's going to be to reform the learning spaces on campus when campuses come to terms with the blended learning systems that they want to employ for the future. And this COVID crisis has also thrown up a huge challenge for assessment, which has been talked about by a number of people. For example, Ana Maria de Santis and colleagues from Modena and Emilia Romagna universities reported on e-proctoring, a very challenging phenomenon. And Maria del Carmo Teixeira Pinto looked at the potential for peer assessment to help us. And lastly, I hope I can be forgiven for mentioning the Oxford debate, where we discussed, under the leadership of Christina Costa, Durham University in the UK, and Mar Perez Angustin of the Université Paul Sabatier in Toulouse, France, whether COVID forcing move to online for millions and millions of students around the world will in fact make a lasting impact on campus-based teaching, or whether campuses will return to what they're familiar with a sigh of relief when and if we eventually get COVID under control. Well, the overall judgment was that COVID would make a permanent change on campus-based teaching, but a significant minority did believe the campuses will go back to the familiar as soon as they can. And in a year's time, we'll hopefully be collecting the evidence across Europe about what is happening, and we'll see that reported at future Eden conferences. The second theme that I picked up on was artificial intelligence, AI, and I was struck in the session led by Cecilia Thomas from the OU Portugal on the ethical challenges of artificial intelligence in our field. She argued that commoditization was in tension with privacy with regard to data, and proposed the need for active digital citizenship And she worried that personalization in our field will actually become profiling, which is anti-open, and that the privacy essential to pedagogy will be lost. I also very much enjoyed the session by Patricia Bernardo and Ulf Daniel Ehlers from Baden-Württemberg's Duale Hochschule. And they reported on a grand challenge study of what AI might mean for the future, work they did with their students. It was a very interesting approach to learning through facilitation, rather than through what somebody called bulimic teaching. I thought that was a great phrase, content-heavy teaching. And this is so important for society, for work, and for education, because do you remember all those promises 30 years ago made by some that the digital revolution would mean all unpleasant work would be done by computers, and we human beings would be having a 3-day working week at most and a life of leisure? Well, it didn't quite work out that way, did it? So how will the promises and potential of AI work out, and in particular for education? How will the conflict between people-centered and commoditized big tech interests be resolved? This is surely going to be a major theme for future research, for critical research, which I hope we'll see reported on in future Eden conferences. And the third theme I wanted to highlight, which was a big theme for me at least, was the question of openness and open scholarship, which is very important in our field of activity. And I really enjoyed the round table of senior scholars, which was facilitated by Ines from UNED and my co-rapporteur. And she was working with José Duarte of WOC in Catalonia, Alison Littlejohn of UCL London, Rory McGrail from Athabasca, who had to stay up all night to do it, poor man, and Eloy Rodriguez from University Minho in Portugal. And they discussed the issue of openness at a time of our societies being so shut down by COVID. And they argued that openness was more important than ever, not only for the products which we're familiar with, but also for data. And they wondered whether this pivot to online is going to accelerate the pivot to open scholarship. But they also recognized the threats to openness from some who can increase the costs of open publishing. And they led me to look for the first time I'd heard of it, for something called the Open COVID Pledge for Education, which you can find if you search for that. And the future of the availability of research to all of us and its application is crucially connected to this issue of open scholarship. Let me just also reflect on some of the new voices to me at least, which I heard at this conference. And the first one was that of Ellen Helsper from London School of Economics. She's a very senior scholar, but I had never come across her before. And I think this is an example of one of Boyer's categories of scholarship, because it shows how expertise in one discipline can come across and be influential in another. I think Ellen helps our field adopt new perspectives on digital inclusion and exclusion, which is her field of particular competence, and gain a deeper understanding of what digital skills can mean. She debunked further this myth of the digital native and pointed out that people who thought they had the most confidence in their digital skills didn't actually have them in reality. She also identified the fact that lower digital skills were very often related to poverty. Some inequalities have been amplified, but not all. Gender, for example, has had more negative outcomes. She argued that support must be more than skills training and include quality content and services for all. And so I think this Ellen Helsper's work will be very helpful for us in our field in further essential monitoring of exclusion and inclusion and developing nuanced understanding. The second new voice that I heard is indeed a newcomer, and that was the person, Irene Charbonneau, who won the Best Research Paper Award. And her work was on social constructivism as a lens of managing online engagement. So Irene is a French researcher based in Sweden, and her work is on an online course in Finland. What a set of impressive intercultural skills to have. And she insisted on creating space for students online to make sense of learning through their mutual recognition of each other as learners and individuals, and that this would reinforce their engagement. So Irene, if I'm allowed to say this, is a young scholar with her career ahead of her, And it's worth remembering that you heard her voice for the first time at the Eden Research Workshop 2020. I think you're going to hear it again. I also thought to myself how I would enjoy a conversation between Irene and Terry Anderson. Terry's version of connectivist pedagogy was one that I think would connect well with Irene's discussion of constructivism. Connectivist pedagogy is surely going to be a significant theme for the future. So when we remember that Irene won the best research paper, I think it's also worth remembering the great support that the Ulrich Bernhardt Foundation has given to Eden over, I think, as long as 20 years in supporting research and scholarship with the best research paper award. So well worth remembering that. So just in conclusion, before I hand over to Ines and for her thoughts, I think this Eden Research Workshop has seemed to me to be a triumph of resilience for the Eden professional community. And if COVID is some sort of plague year, a year of the pest in Europe, I'm sure this event is going to make us feel confident that a renaissance is going to follow. So thanks again to Antonio Teixeira, to his team at OpenU Portugal, and to Eden for all their work in putting this conference on. So let me now hand straight over to Ines for her thoughts, which I'm looking forward to.
Thank you, Alan. I will first show us this cloud. Do you see it? The cloud word clouds. It's made from the titles of all the contributions, and I think it's a summary of what was talked about during this event. And I will read my impressions. It's something I never do, so I don't know if I will be able to stick to the report, but I will try. In this conference, in this event, it was with no doubt that the pandemic was the situation was very present all the time, and the pandemic has led to the widening of the online provision in education. This rapid change has been addressed in presentations, in plenaries, parallel session at the Oxford debate, and there were specific sessions dedicated to the analysis of the impact of the COVID-19 in education. And overall, an overall reflection about all that was the question about what will remain in the long term, what will be the impact of these changes and what will remain in the long term. And 2 out of 3 people at the Oxford debate, from the Oxford debate participants, said that they thought that the changes will remain. I was among them. And to me, this is in accordance or aligned with one of the words in the cloud, which is the transformation or change. And a positive or optimistic horizon, and keep good expectations about transformative potential of a current crisis or situation, even such a difficult one as this one. And being optimistic about the potential development that education can generate, to me, is consubstantial to education. It goes with being an educator, and I think many people at this conference are educators. And this was also raised in the previous conference about hope and about resilience, and I think it was present. And the transformation processes starts from ourselves, and I have seen many presentations reporting about different studies undertook at the micro level. So there were researchers that have shared their analysis about the courses they teach or their teaching practices before, during the pandemic. And many of these contributions were trying to understand the learners' experience and how they were living and performing during the pandemic, and comparing between the on-site and online settings. And these students' perception and satisfaction surveys and interviews have provided very valuable feedback that can help to make decisions for improving the quality of these courses. And one of the topics that had deserved quite a lot of attention in some researches and studies is the social dimension in the teaching and learning process. And the analysis and promotion of the students' interaction for learning purposes, which is underpinned by social constructivist theoretical perspective, has been the topic in some of the contributions, and remarked the role of learners as agents in their learning processes, and remarks also the human side of the digital environment. And in this sense, the community of inquiry framework has been present in a specific workshop yesterday and also in different studies, particularly dealing with the social dimension. This is the case for the best paper award that also Alan mentioned right now. But regarding transformation and beyond our respective spaces for control, power, or change that we have, each of us have as practitioners, this is a limited space, and there are other transformations needed. And structural inequalities were raised during the event. The pandemic has shown that the digital divide is still not solved, is not a solved problem. And there are difficulties and inequalities both in the access to the digital devices and to proper internet in many population sectors in different countries, but also there is the digital divide with regards to digital literacy, even in the more digitalized countries such as the European countries. This was also raised by the scholar who Alan mentioned before, a specialist in inequalities. So the use of the digital tools for educational learning purposes needs a specific training both for the teachers and for the learners. And this teacher training was exploring many contributions in the conference as well. Moving from the micro level, there were also some contributions at the meso level, reporting about institutional change experiences. And there were some managers, or also researchers, sharing their description and analysis of the digital transformation of their institutions, which went through converting the paper-based exams into online exams, for instance, or using mostly synchronous tools. This was also raised in the previous session. The use of artificial intelligence and data analytics, training of teachers and tutors. So this move to digital assessment specifically has been very relevant in the conference and during the pandemic for all the institutions, including open universities. And there were concerns about proctoring, academic integrity, but also about the need to rethink in the medium term, the way we are doing the assessment. So words like authentic assessment, formative assessment were also on the debate. And also coming back to this institutional perspective, and there was a general claim at the event from the open universities, open and distance education universities, about their historical contribution and accumulated expertise that has not been much considered in this move towards remote teaching recently. So the emergency remote teaching has resembled the face-to-face mode, just with sometimes just synchronous lectures in different platforms. The move towards online education is not considering all the existing research and practice background that communities such as Eden provide. But nevertheless, despite this, that open universities have a tradition in e-learning, these open universities have also considered that they have not gone too far in their own digital transformation yet. So there were some voices from people from open universities saying this. So this is also an opportunity for open and distance university. Just as a sum up of this section is that the rapid reaction to the lockdown is not in question, and the problems were safe, and there were very creative and quick mitigation solutions for the students so they could complete their courses. But there is uncertainty about the maintenance and sustainability of these emergency solutions, or if we are going back to the normal situation. And with regards to open research, that also Alan mentioned, the round panel session this morning provided some insight about a similar situation. We are like halfway in the process. So the pandemic is an opportunity to promote open access to research results. And for instance, in the health area, this has been a must. Research about the COVID-19 had to be public and rapidly available for all the researchers. But there are remaining cultural practices, like the way that research and researchers are assessed, are evaluated for promotion, And there are commercial interests that profit for commercial publicists who have a big interest in publication and who have joined the open movement to take advantage of charging with article processing charges to authors and institutions. So there are this type of barriers that dificulty the expansion of open scholarship. And also other challenges were raised beyond open access to publications, but covering other parts of the process like open data, open peer review, sustainability, and innovation in all the digital publication process. And as a final remark, I wanted to say that similar to what's happening in research publication, where corporate private interests have a very relevant role in setting the agenda, we should not forget the question, who is setting the agenda in education? And there was a lot of discussion in this conference about the students, teachers, and researchers, and also managers and institutions as agents for consolidating the good practices in e-learning. But there are other agents at the macro level as well, such as policies and regulations in our respective countries and regions, and also corporations that provide technological tools and also educational content, who set the basis of what we can do when going online. And I think this is an issue that was not dealt so deeply at the conference, or at least maybe I missed those sessions. But still the conference, to me, and despite these difficult circumstances we are still living, we are still inside the storm, inside the pandemic. But the conference has been, once again, a community for sharing, learning, and networking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. Ines, can I hand over to Maxim now, please?
Thank you very much. And I'm coming at it from Canada's perspective. And one of the things I'd like to highlight is, from having listened to the summary from Alan, as well as from Ines, which are very, very insightful. In some ways, Eden, in doing this work over the last couple of days, you've put together the building blocks for what we in Canada are working on, what I call virtual learning strategies. I want you to picture that in Ontario, we have 24 colleges, 22 universities, and the government is about to announce in about 3 or 4 weeks a virtual learning strategy. And when I hear Alan, when I hear Ines, there are at least 4 or 5 areas where what you have come up with in terms of insights are precisely the building blocks for a strategy moving forward. And I'd like you to understand that it's not only research that you are doing or insights or analysis, but you are really contributing to major decisions by government that have a huge impact on populations in other countries as well. Example, in the area of content, I've heard Alan and I've heard Ines talk about that is how we need to also be a catalyst for development of content in a way that is ensuring high quality, in a way that is ensuring open access. And that is a very big preoccupation here as we in this sector trying to put together a strategy moving forward. I've also heard the part about capacity building in terms of instructional development, as well as training of instructors. And again, here, as we are putting together a virtual learning policy and strategy, this is an incredibly important part of that strategy. A third one as well that I've heard Ines mention, the word digital divide. So infrastructure for us in terms of in an area which is the size of Germany and France put together, to give you a sense of the scale, that is access to broadband and digital divide become a very important issue. And again, your deliberations, your insights, your thoughts are contributing to that thinking here across in North America. There's also the question of, I think it was Alan who mentioned about the myth of the digital native And again, here we are very much looking at digital fluency as an area that we really need to focus on, because we should not assume that students necessarily have that capacity. And lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the whole aspect of sharing internationally, which Eden does so well, which both Alan and Ines in their summary show that the range of presenters, the issues being discussed, I think bring that community, not just in Europe, but also in North America together. So let me recap by saying, in the area of content, in the area of capacity building, in the area of digital fluency, in the area of infrastructure and international cooperation, what Ines and Alan have summed up are good building blocks. And as an opportunistic participant, I'm learning a lot from that, and I'll be sharing that with our governments, our universities, and our colleges here in Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maxim. That's your very encouraging words. It's nice to see that the output of the conference goes beyond mere academic areas of influence. That was very good indeed. So finally, I'd like to hand over to Sandra Cortina, the president of Eden, now to finalize the research workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, team, and thank you to all rapporteurs. Excellent remarks. Now I would like to share my presentation. I'm not sure I can do that. Just give me a second so that I have a presentations which I want to share. So, okay, yeah, I just found it. Yes, share. Okay, do you see it?
Perfectly. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So we have come to the end of one really terrific event. This is Eden research workshop online for the first time. And let me conclude with some information. So if we look at the numbers, we had more than 200 delegates from 43 countries, really impressive numbers. I'm certain that we can be very proud of them. The next one is that we had 48 full papers, 7 workshops, 16 posters, and 14 PhD symposium presentation, Oxford-style debate, excellent one, and roundtable discussion today with really good remarks on openness and open scholarship. Excellent keynote speakers and rapporteurs, moderators. Also, we awarded our colleagues with Eden Senior Fellow Award to Irina, Antonella, and Joseph, and also with Fellow Award to Maria Rosaria, Ulf, Covadonga, James, and Radu, who we already awarded in June in Timișoara at the online annual conference. And we had the winner of Best Research Paper Award to Irene Charbonneau from Stockholm University in Sweden, and also the new award, the Best Research in Progress Award, which went to the Universidade Aberta in Portugal. So very nice indeed. I also voted between 3 proposed posters. We are coming to the end, to the 3 wonderful days we had. Although online, I think they managed to show that we can be community, that we can pass the issue of not being able to be present. I am also missing the chance to have lousy coffee and maybe not so good brunches, but to be able to be physically with other colleagues and chat and share experience and of course have a good glass of wine after all the events. But I hope we will manage in future to come to this situation that COVID will not be an issue anymore. I wish to thank, first of all, to my dear colleague Antonio Teixeira from Universidade Aberta, who hosted with the Education and Distance Learning Center of Universidade Aberta this 11th Eden Research Workshop. I wish to thank Conference Program Committee, Best Research Paper Award Jury, Keynotes, Eden and Up members and fellows. I wish to thank to the authors, to session moderators, rapporteurs, and technical chairs, and and above all, to all participants who contributed that this research workshop has been the highlight of the Eden events. Also, in the end, I need to mention that we had the Portugal Foundation for Science and Technology who provided us with Zoom environment. We had international partner Contact North and conference sponsor Clothes. And let me, in the end, announce some further Eden and events. This is Open Classroom Conference starting in November now, which is all co-organized by Elinor Germanickia Gogi and the Eden. And also before that, we have just 1 week of the rest. On November 2 to 6th, we have Eden Online and Distance Learning Week, +1 because we will join the European Vocational Training Week on the 9th of November. So stay with us. We are continuing with our activities very soon. And at the end, I would like to announce that Eden 30th annual conference will be next year in Madrid, in UNED, and I'm hoping that Tim will wait there with us, for us with good glass of wine to be able to drink it jointly in physical presence. So once again, thank you all for being with us for this is really great Eden Research Workshop. Thank you.
And we wish you the best from North America.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Maxim.
Thank you, Antonio. Pleasure. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye, all.
Bye-bye.
Sandra,
yes.
It seems that the Secretariat would like to have a photo. So can we ask everyone in the room to connect their cameras? So for
yes.
the final
I'll
shot?
stop sharing.
Yes, please.
Yeah, and in the end, I almost forgot to say a big thank to Eden Secretariat for providing really good support in enabling that this conference happens. So thank all of colleagues from Secretariat with leadership of Andres Jesuch. Okay, so we are doing the photo.
We have to smile.
I don't even need to tuck my tummy in.
Well, I missed the opportunity to show my gowns and everything, but well, they will have to wait for the next year.
Well, maybe you can say goodbye at the same time, okay?
Yes. So,
bye.
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 Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I got the photo. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you as well, Judith.
See you next time in Madrid, at least.
You.
We stay. Are we staying, Antonio?
Yes, until the end, please.
Just for saying goodbye.
We're still here. Otherwise, we kick them off.
I'm going to remove.
Remove the not to be here persons.
Well, okay. I think we have. Yes, it's only us now.
Yes.
Oh,
No.